We are recording.
Okay, I will call the March 11th regular board meeting to order. Charlie, if you would do a roll call.
All right, Chairperson Beecham.
Here.
Vice Chair Fonger.
Here.
Board Member Cadwalder.
Here.
Board Member Straubing. Here. Board Member Crawford. Here.
Okay, the agenda, I will look to, I think Charlie has a change that he wants to add.
Want to add an item between D and E for a non-union employee handbook orientation period update. Tangentially related to the PTO policy updates for the Earned Sick Time Act. So we'll layer that as a separate action item.
Okay, with that, I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda with that change.
Move to approve the agenda with change. I'll support.
It's been moved and supported. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Approval of the minutes from the February 11th, 2025 regular board meeting.
I'll move.
So moved.
Yeah, supported.
It's been moved and supported. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Moving on, safety moment.
All right, so this month, the safety moment will be brought to us by Megan, and she's struggling with the Adobe. So I'm talking as slow as I can, Megan. Yeah, slow elevator. Never fails that as soon as everything is up and ready to go, it doesn't work when you need it. Okay.
So my safety moment about spring cleaning. Yay, well, temperatures and sunshine, it just makes you want to clean, so. Just a couple of basic instructions on all of your,
Bravo. Very good.
Don't mix chemicals. A little bit of this, a little bit of that.
Check the batteries.
Check, I would say check your batteries, and they always say check them when the time changes. So yeah, check your batteries. So thank you, Megan.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on, public comment, any public? Hearing none. We'll move on to action items. The first thing is MPPA update. Everybody has one time or another, I think, has met Pat. This is Pat Bowen, General Manager, President.
CEO and General Manager.
At MPPA.
No, thanks, Pat. Appreciate Pat. Appreciate you coming out, and Pat and I've seen Pat's slide deck. I think we're gonna breeze through some of the earlier stuff, and I imagine there'll be a lively discussion throughout this. So take it away, Pat.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me out. I try to get out to every single member once a year. It proves to be pretty difficult though, if you're gonna try to go to a governing body meeting. It's one thing to meet with staff, but try to get out to a governing body meeting. So last year, my ambitious schedule didn't quite make it. So it's been a few years, I think, since I've been to Lowell. The last time I was over at the place I was driving to before I realized I better check out. Thanks for having me. Let's just keep this informal. I do want to just double check because I don't want to like banter on way longer than you were anticipating. So is it 15 minutes, 20 minutes?
So we go
If
to
I was-
11.
If you have 15 minutes of discussion or 15 minutes of content, it'll be a 30, 45 minute conversation. And I think it's important. Nope, you have all the time you need. This is,
4 hours or 5
And
minutes.
Terry's taping the voice, so you're good.
No, it's, that's only on Monday night. Used to be on Monday and Tuesday, but this season is only Mondays.
with as much change and as much as dynamic as our power supply is and the
Yeah.
challenges that we're facing.
Yeah.
We'll dedicate whatever time is of value. And I,
Okay.
Because
if that's 4 hours, then let's go. But we'll get you, we'll get you home at a decent time too.
that's why we put you on the first on the list. So
Okay.
let's get out of here.
Well, I will say that my history in this business, like I go through these periods of time where I'm really interesting to talk to at like cocktail parties. I was last back in 2001 when Enron, those
Oh, yeah.
everyone asked me questions, and I kind of got silent for a while. Back into the so I'll talk to you now because it seems like energy's in the news every day, right? So anyway, a lot of fascinating, complicated issues to discuss. So as Charlie mentioned, there's kind of the proverbial slides that I throw in there. I don't need to go through these unless somebody, I don't also want to skip them if there's something that's of interest here, but they're the sort of canned use stuff. So we can kind of, unless you want me to, I can roll.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, Megan's in control. She can advance. And if there's my assumption is that the board is familiar with joint action,
Yeah,
MPPA.
I think I will maybe hesitate here just a little bit on a few of these. So this is more reiterating what a project-based agency is, because a lot of times, if you go across the United States, the vast majority of agencies are not project-based. They're all requirements or full requirements-based, which means that the members are really treated like an industrial customer. They get an industrial rate, and whatever that joint action agency invested in or purchased, their accountants come up with what the rate is that they need to charge the wholesale member. And Charlie, you're kind of used to that in the TBA model back when you were in Paris, France. But the project-based agency, of course, is different. We members choose the projects that best fit what their needs are. And in Michigan, that was particularly important because a lot of municipal utilities, particularly the bigger ones, invested heavily in local electric generation. And so they didn't need particular participation rights in other types of projects. And so they just wanted what best fit their needs. And there's a lot of interesting history of MPPA, which I won't bore you with now, that how all these things sort of evolve. But anyway, the project-based model, I think actually is the best model because it provides you the ability to do whatever you want to do locally here. Obviously, we're integrated now. The way the electricity business works, we have to know what you're doing locally, and you have to know what we're doing at the wholesale grid level. We are very integrated together, but the point is you have the freedom to do it, which other joint action agencies don't. In a world where there's a lot more distributed energy technology being implemented, a lot more renewable plans that are very community centric, we have a very different demographic among the members we serve. We have the resort communities, the Traverse Cities, the Charlevoix, the Harbor Springs, the Petoskey's. We have the industrial cities like Bay City and Wyandotte, Lansing, and we have everybody in between. So the communities are different people, different tax base. So it's important to understand that. So we'll just keep rolling here. I don't need to get into this unless you want to know how we vote and operate, but other than Charlie has just as much voting support as Lansing, which is important. And I think you understand the concept behind joint action, so I don't really need to get into that, although I will say that one of the things that's happening now, and Charlie can attest to this, is that we've been spending more time actually trying to see if we can harvest some local power generation from all of our members. And why we're doing that is something I'm going to talk about here later. So it's a little different approach than maybe what MPPA has done in the past. And it's kind of depicted a bit more on the far right there, which in that particular case, the BTMG is behind the meter generation solar. And it makes sense though, if we can work with 4 members and put the similar kind of analysis, similar kind of analytics, similar kind of economic modeling, and then similar type of equipment, we can bring a lot more efficiencies to the table for particularly our smaller members who don't have the staff to do all that. So in a world that we're going to talk about here in a second, I will be spending more time on this, become more and more important.
And I just to chime in real quick,
Yeah.
from my perspective, if you go back one slide, Meg, in the 4 years I've been here, I've seen a shift towards economies of knowledge. I don't know exactly what the
Yeah.
appropriate term is, but we, as a smaller member, as we're faced with rapidly changing legislative landscape and compliance requirements, needing to leverage MPPA skill sets for our compliance purposes or our needs to be adaptive, is shifted MPPA's role, from what I've heard, quite a bit.
Oh, yeah.
MPPA very much was a power supply company or power supply organization. That's what they didn't deal with things that happened in the communities nearly as much, but their focus on services and that economies of scale in terms of knowledge and opportunities has been a pretty significant shift. And don't want to underscore that because we're heavily dependent on MPPA, and that partnership is vital to our long-term success, not just in power supply, but in all these other things that are really shaping the industry or reshaping the industry more.
Yeah, no, it's a really important point. I mean, the electric industry has gone through so many interesting phases of change. But the more recent one, though, is that it used to be not that long ago that there was the wholesale electricity business and there was the retail electricity business. And they were very distinctly different. And obviously they fed into each other, but the tasks, the skill sets, requirements, they were just completely different. And there wasn't a lot of dependency between the two. Obviously, the one had to come up with a power supply portfolio to serve the other, but there wasn't a lot of integrated activities now. But today, the way the electricity business is, it's really just, there is no bill. I think we're getting to a point where there is really no wholesale and retail electricity business anymore. There is still the remnants of that, and there will be for a while, but they're very, very integrated. So we really cannot even do our jobs anymore, serving their needs without having much more real-time understanding of what's actually happening in the community. Now, we don't need to know if there's a pole down on Pleasant Street, but we do need to know what's happening with commercial and industrial loads. We are trying to actually find ways to locate resources actually inside our member communities, because we're finding there's advantages to that, which we'll talk about. So yeah, it's just a much more integrated business. And that actually is relatively, that phenomenon has been underway for a while, but it's really sort of hit the accelerator in the last 5 years. Okay. I'll just, at the high end, Charlie talked about skills. I call economies of skills, but it's really industry expertise. Obviously I need to employ people at our joint action agency that understand the business, that complements your knowledge. You understand certain parts of your business that we don't have the same level of skills because we're just not touching it every day like you are. You expect that same thing from us. So, and the other concept, of course, it's really, really important to us is risk management. This has become a very complicated, risky business to be in, and you count on us to manage those risks. And so we're putting a lot of time and energy investing in those. And then, of course, when we're going out for power supply decision-making, you expect us to understand the markets. We understand, are you getting a fair price for what you're going to purchase, or what you're going to build, or what you're going to contract for. So that's the competitive aspect of it. And of course, obviously the sharing we talked about earlier, which is really the economies of scale concept. All right, we can roll. I don't need to get too deep in here, but our strategic plan, which is a 5-year plan, it's redeveloped every 3 years. And these are sort of the key drivers that are part of our plan. And the engagement part, unfortunately, Lowell's very engaged. Charlie's very engaged. Steve was very engaged when he was there. Prior to Steve, there was a level of engagement too. So Lowell, generally speaking, has been pretty engaged member. We have a lot of members that aren't very engaged, and I'm seeing very positive things happen there. But engagement's really, really important when an industry is changing as rapidly as it is, because we have to have governing bodies really appreciate the speed that they have to make decisions by. They also have to appreciate risk. And so engagement is really, really critical component of it. The other things are more obvious. Obviously, we were on a heavy, and still are under Michigan legislation, a decarbonization obligation. Some of it was voluntary. A lot of big companies had these very big voluntary goals there. End use customers, let's face it, I mean, whether we like it or not, the utility industry is always sort of just, whether they call them customers, they call them ratepayers, and not really customers. And I think customers is a really, really important definition now, because they're taking more control in people's homes now. They have equipment inside their house now that can control energy use. And then decentralization is really just making technology smaller and more adaptable to local use. So, all right, we can roll through that. So our 2025 work plan consists of, well, not surprisingly, resource adequacy, and I'm going to talk why that's so important. But fortunately, we've given ourselves a bit of a runway here, but the runway is closing quick. So we really have an obligation, really by 2029, to make sure we have new resources hitting the ground or new power supply contracting arrangements going live. Clean energy. We have Michigan energy legislation, whether we like it or not. At this point, we have to comply to it. And so we are really spending a lot of time trying to understand not just the obvious aspects of it, like what are the requirements, but what are the implications to our portfolio? What are the costs? What are the operational requirements of our business? All the things that kind of go on behind the scenes, like in a restaurant, you know, see how someone brings up that plate of food. The presentation side we get, it's how do we get there behind the scenes. We have a very sophisticated portfolio management system, but it's still lacking some of the requirements that are going to need if we're going to have a power supply portfolio that's going to consist of potentially up to 50% renewables. It's a staggering number, and batteries, and we need to really have a different type of system to deal with that. Of course, financial stability I talked about. We are a electric transmission owner, so that's 120 kV and above. And so we're trying to maximize those contracts. Real simple. Why? It's not because we want to be big transmission owners, it's because it's a way for us to help lower the power supply costs of our members. It's that simple. And then staffing, and that staffing's hard, right? Because the industry is becoming, it's very, very fast paced. It's very unique. And so finding people or training people is really a really important part of my job. So any questions about that before we get into
Is it the clean energy part? What do you mean by find unique value?
Yes. So going out today, for example, maybe the best way to describe this is, so if you go back literally not that many years, 2021, we executed 2 power purchase agreements for less than $45 a megawatt hour for 20 years. Today, those PPAs are 80. So those are these traditional arrangements. So we're really trying to look, and those were Michigan-based transactions. Today, we have some rights under the legislation that allow us to enter into different kinds of transactions to still meet the renewable and clean energy requirements, but maybe not be wedded to these 20 or 25-year contracts at these really, really high prices. Also, we've never really ventured outside of the state of Michigan to look at contracts. We're actually starting to look at resources down in Indiana and so forth, and trying to weigh the economics there, because they're like $20, $25 a megawatt hour less expensive than Michigan. And so we're trying to understand what the congestion risks are. We eventually going to settle out at a similar price. So and then finally, you know, if this nuclear plant gets lit up here in a couple years, our understanding of that is there's way more power there than the two off takers need. And so, maybe there's opportunities there for us to take a piece of that. So that's what I mean by unique opportunities, thinking differently about what we've done next.
Okay, good, thank you.
Yeah.
What is the size of your staff? I mean,
22. Yeah. Exactly the same number of members, one person per member.
So that's easy to remember. I'll actually remember.
Yeah. All right, that's fine. So now, obviously, I have never, I feel like I'm saying this and I'm exaggerating, but I've never been around, it seems like in the last 6 months, where so many different interpretations of what's happening like this business have come and gone in the last 6 months. From, I don't know if you guys remember the DeepSeek, if anyone's into AI, reads the newspaper there, where there's a Chinese company that came out with a AI or large language model called DeepSeek, and the entire stock market crashed. Well, actually, the stock market didn't crash, but a lot of the AI chip guys did, the power guys. The Constellation stock was at $350 a share, and now, as of yesterday, is $198. So that's a pretty big change.
And the fact that they didn't require as much energy, those the Chinese chips.
Correct. Yeah, that was the implication. I don't
Right.
think it's never
Understood.
never been verified. Yep. But beyond that, though, even after, I think there was this belief after that, that might not be right. Looks like they had hedge fund, they got a bunch of these chips elsewhere, so their trading costs were really not true. But what's happened since then, though, has been an economy now that looks a little bit more fragile. There's obviously trade wars going on, and the cost of this. I mean, if you look at like people like Meta and Microsoft, they're going to be spending like $60 billion. It's like, it's hard to fathom. And, if things are slowing down in the economy, that's not something you're going to do so lightly. And so what I'm continuing to see is this reforecasting of power consumption, because so much of it's driven by technology. So, but this is the latest and greatest. So I'm going to stick with this for now. But if you find out in 6 weeks from now that, hey, there's some that they Pat lied, I Googled it, it's really not 1%. Just recognize this is a very fluid situation. But this is kind of an interesting slide in that it really does depict the electric load growth we had in previous decades were phenomenal. And how dead it's been really since really 2008. After the Great Recession, things just have been and that's why we bought a lot of power, quite frankly. Started before I got to MPPA, but really continued because it was cheaper to buy than build, like substantially cheaper, because you just had no load growth. But now we're entering into this era of load growth. We're entering into an era where investment in new resources is key. Will this load growth happen? Will it be more? Will it be less? I mean, we are our industry really is the feedstock behind the AI and the technology growth. Without the electric industry keeping up, they can't build more data centers. That's something. And there's very few places in the United States, honestly, that have excess power laying around. There are a few places, like up in the Northwest, but that's pretty much. If you want to serve this new load, you got to build a new power plant, period. Any questions there? Oh, by the way, if there's a big recession, of course, it totally change these numbers.
Would it be necessary to increase it by 50%? Sorry. What does that look like? See the big picture, because it's all not happening. Make sure that
Yeah,
gold and whatever.
this is US.
Yeah, so what does that look like?
Oh,
Another 20, 30 more facilities, pick that 15% more we need, more?
100, hundreds actually of facilities. Yeah. I mean, it's 60 to 70 gigawatts of power across the United States would be needed by the early 2030s if these projections were right. Now, again, that's not going to happen if you can't keep up on the power plant side. So,
And it's around the clock power.
Right.
They don't operate.
yeah, and
Yeah, it's energy. They don't operate when the sun's shining or, they are very high load factor customers, 90+%, and reliability is critical. So having consistent power supply and reliable power supply is critical, which is why you see Microsoft signing deals with nuclear plants or trying, and there's interest in restarting more of these
Yeah.
nuclear
And
plants.
it's not only that, but what's pushing up against or making it more complicated, the formula more complicated is that the big users of electricity also want carbon-free energy.
Yeah.
Wind and solar aren't gonna do it because they don't provide around-the-clock reliable electricity. So gotta add batteries, and that's why the nuclear power plants are trying to get That's the driver behind it. Okay, next slide. So recently, NERC, which is a reliability organization, and there's different regions of NERC. And they identified sort of the mid-continent or the Midwest ISO as an area of high risk. And that's just generally because there's been a lot of closures already of coal plants. And there's really been no natural gas plants built in quite a while. So with surging power demand, if you look at the transmission queue across the United States, and this is definitely true in what I'll call the Eastern Interconnect and the Midwest Interconnect, it's been largely wind and solar batteries. Actually, largely wind and solar, and more recently batteries. And that's because there's legislation in Illinois and Michigan, of course, and then just meeting customer needs. Customers want. So, and some of the Michigan's actually, we're an old coal state. The age of our plants in general, actually, the two youngest plants that are owned in the whole state are actually jointly owned by MPPA. Their last one's built from the late 70s, early 80s. So everything else was built prior to that. And so they were naturally going to retire anyway. So that's what you're seeing. So we got through this winter. This was a legit winter. And we got through it. There's a lot of lessons learned from previous winters, which is great. The question is, we haven't really had a really hot summer in a while. And what happens next is obviously the big worry.
That's up there. I know today I was listening again today about 5% tariffs. Canadian energy and then Michigan is hooked to that.
Yeah.
Do we use any of that or is that just other ones?
That's a great question. I was going to address this.
I figured you get.
Yeah. I'm going to touch on this at the board meeting tomorrow. The short of it is, it's not very impactful to Michigan. It's I don't want to use name. I hate when people name drop things I don't understand when I'm in them, but it's really ISO New England and so these are two regional transmission organizations. One that serves the state of New York only. That's why they call it the New York ISO. And the other one's ISO New England, which serves all the New England states. They're definitely much more impacted by that because a lot of power flows into those two RTOs that are used for serving the load there. There's some power that flows in from Manitoba into the upper areas like Minnesota, not a lot. And Michigan, I'm a former Detroit Edison employee. We used to have huge deals where we're going back and forth between Ontario power generation. Those are largely subsided. We'll have some impact, minor. Now, if people withhold power, that's a different story. Yeah, that's going to cause a rip. I like to liken the electricity business like a bathtub of water and faucets and drains. Well, if you turn off a couple faucets, even if it's on the other side of the bathtub, it's going to impact the water level in the tub. So, yeah, if it gets to that crazy level, then.
Because that unit was on at 2 o'clock.
Oh, is it off? Is it off?
Yeah, the Ontario governor or whoever he is said that they do.
Oh, maybe it's just after Trump threatened steel or something.
Yeah,
So
so again, like I said.
So
I
electricity.
get all excited about
Yeah, think of it this way. So on the economic side, electricity is dispatched by the least cost. but there's something called security constraints there. So even if the least cost resource could run all the way to the top, you can't do it because the transmission lines can't reliably move that power through overheating. So that unit has to be dispatched down, and a more expensive resource has to be dispatched up. That's called security constrained economic dispatch. Well, the whole system operates like that. So if Ontario or Quebec is moving some amount of power that's less expensive, and suddenly that becomes more expensive, well, that can just change that economic dispatch, right? Certain other plants might come online. So you can see the price level increase ever so slightly. It's going to impact Eastern RTO more than Michigan. That's the short answer. Yep. Next slide. Okay. So this is the stuff that really want to speak more about. So MPPA has been very fortunate. We have entered into, well, I call them bilateral contracts. They're power purchase agreements to buy capacity from somebody else who owns a power plant, who has the capacity to sell. And really, for most of the time I've been at MPPA, with some small exceptions, we've entered into some huge transactions to buy capacity from resources at costs that are less expensive than building, period. But like every worm that turns, that worms turn. And there's a couple other factors that one of them is that we also have too much concentration risk with some of these parties. So if something were to happen to them, you know, even though we have these financially firm contracts, there's just a lot of financial risk. So it's kind of in everybody's interest not to transact anymore until some of these other contracts roll off the books. That's the more of a financial risk management side of things. But just in general, the dependency issue. You know, you pick up the phone and that's it, and you're hoping to do a deal, and they're like, sorry, we're out, can't sell to you anymore, don't have anything to sell to you. You can't be like, oh shit, we have no plan B, right? So that's one thing. The second issue is that interconnecting into the MISO grid, which is this is the regional organization called Mid-Continent Independent System Operator. The transmission system is so backed up, it's like a congested highway as far as your eye can see. And the reason for that is because a lot of these states and customers wanted more and more renewables. And so there's just been thousands and thousands and thousands of megawatts of wind and solar projects trying to get into what they call the generator interconnection queue. And MISO now, they're on their 6th tariff revision to the transmission queue. 6 times now they've revised it, all trying to manage this giant onslaught of power generation trying to come in. They keep ratcheting up the cost and making it more difficult and demonstrating you have contracts and site control. So continually, in their latest thing, but the 7th iteration just happened. It's actually not even finished yet. They're gonna get 2 queues. One for, well, they're not saying it this way, but this is really what's gonna happen. One for all the renewable guys, and one for the guys who can demonstrate that their project is meeting a resource adequacy. And they're gonna apply to FERC, and we'll see if FERC grants it.
It's like a base level power thing.
You have to be able to show that your resource can provide reliable capacity and you're serving load with it. Now, why are they doing all this? Because right now it takes on average to get through this queue 4 years. That's a long time. It's a long time to wait. What's the other problem? Permitting. I mean, you know all this even better than I do. I mean, trying to build anything anywhere is just harder. It's really hard when you're trying to build a power plant. People just generally don't like those things near their house. And I understand that. And so even all of these solar and wind projects that originally were having no problem, I mean, wind has basically been outlawed in Michigan with a couple of exceptions. This is after we built this massive transmission infrastructure in the thumb of Michigan. It's supposed to be 5,000 megawatts there of wind. There's 1,400 megawatts. It's been stuck there for 8 years. Not a single project's been built in that time. And that's because what's happened is all the townships in those communities and the counties changed the ordinance, made it impossible to build there. Same thing's not happening with solar. Some of these communities are like, no more. We don't want to see it anymore. So even if they had an agreement, they're coming back and changing it. It's really hard to build anything anywhere permitting is tough. It's not impossible, but it's challenging. I lived through, I had to renegotiate, it was very painful. Charlie probably thought I was a pretty bad CEO. I mean, I literally had to have dozens of meetings with members about renegotiating solar PPAs. This is after we had a streak of just executing bang, bang, bang. They were getting them done. In fact, I think a couple that we still have in our books today are some of the best solar deals that were ever done in Michigan. Really proud of those. But the later ones, the ones we did in 2021 at the lowest price, renegotiated them twice. And you might say, why would you renegotiate those? Where do you, a pansy? Well, the problem was economic. Like if I didn't, under the legislation, if I didn't renegotiate those, the cost to replace them was just so much more that the renegotiated price was still better off for our members. And so trust me, we had a lot of late nights trying to decide what we should do there. But why I'm speaking about that, there's been a big supply chain stress. It was really, really bad after COVID. It's kind of subsided a little bit, but we're still having problems. And you guys know this, transformers are still a huge problem. Most of the polysilicon comes from China. So for solar projects, it's still an overseas equipment. So supply chain, real problem. Right sizing risk is really, for MPPA, we want to try to spread our chips around the table. We don't want any of our members to be in projects that are too big. We try to do projects that are 50 megawatts in size for solar. Most of these solar projects, incredible how it's changed. Most of these solar guys want you to do 100, 150 minimum. Well, that means that we have to then rely on Consumers Energy or Detroit Edison to take the other piece. And then we got to worry about all their regulatory garbage and stuff. So it adds complexity to the project. So right sizing is a consideration. Traditional partner rethink. Consumers Energy called me on June 5th, 2022 to let me know that they were going to issue a press release in 4 hours that they were closing the Campbell plant. That's not a real good partner. This was 8 months before I had to make a filing to the Michigan Public Service Commission about resource adequacy. So fortunately, Campbell wasn't a big part of our portfolio. It happened to be a big part of your portfolio, however, so it caused this particular community stress. I never want that to ever happen again. The way, unfortunately, that happened is MPPA owned a very, very small relative to the total size. We have no leverage when you own 8% of a project. With Detroit Edison, we own a much bigger share of the project, so they've got 5-year notice requirements, and it's just a different kind of a relationship. But even still, even with them, the investor-owned utilities have a different business model. If they, like consumers, can get away with, so Consumers Energy, a lot of people don't realize this, they're recovering their capital and the return on capital, even though they're closing Campbell through 2039. So even though that asset will not produce any more power, the Michigan Public Service Commission agreed that they get to earn a return on that asset through 2039, because that's when the original date was going to run. And
The people on that end of the table don't like that fact.
yeah, right. So, I mean, the reality is they're kind of paying for 2 power plants, right? Well, MPPA, I got to write off $40 million. It's going. So you have to realize that back in the early 80s, late 70s, I mean, and still, we want to be friends with the investor utilities. If it does make sense for us to invest alongside them, we don't want to just dismiss it outright. We also have to be honest about the risks of doing business with them. They have different motivations, and we don't need to depend on them. Back in the late 70s, it's a different world. And then finally is the Michigan energy legislation. Look, 50% by 2030, 60% by 2035, 80% by 80% and then 100% clean energy required by 2040. So there's some pretty complicated issues to deal with there. So what has that done with our resource adequacy strategy? Okay, well, as I said earlier, we are now in a full onslaught effort to determine, assess how much capacity can be built behind our member systems, inside our member communities. And These are thermal projects that do burn fossil fuel, but that are really designed to be more peaking resources. So they're not running around the clock. They're there largely to provide reliability to the electric grid and reliability to the local community.
So in the current landscape or things that we can foresee in the future, will we be called upon to fire up here even more?
Yeah,
Yeah.
most likely.
Yeah, because the two turbines that we have out here, this is what we're, not replicating, but same concept of those units sit there and for the most part, they're there for grid support.
Right.
We talk about anytime we hit emergency conditions, but we tend to not economically dispatch those.
Yeah.
The value from a capacity standpoint and being available is worth far more than any risk that we would take by operating some 30-year-old units to make a small energy margin. So we're really focused on, think when Pat's talking, thermal BTMGs, similar operating strategies as those, but they'd be more efficient. It'd be more modern. So not a one-to-one, but similar type operating strategy.
Right. Yep. So I don't want to, get stuck in this point too long, but basically we have a couple people in our office, actually, of Lowell, one of them who's very actively involved in trying to assess, hey, well, how big is the red box here? And we really want to know. And we have about 4 or 5 communities that we know probably have the greatest potential, because what we want to look at is member hosted projects where we might put a project in Wyandotte or Zealand or Bay City and have other members participate in it. You might ask, well, how's that power stays there? Well, because those members are involved in other projects that are outside of their system, we can use a displacement arrangement. So the power definitely has to be sized appropriately for that community. We can't build something that's bigger than the community there. But it would allow contractually other members to participate in. Again, what does that do? Well, the transmission queue issue of waiting 4 years to get through a transmission queue, we don't have to deal with that. Presumably, we're in a community where hopefully there's more local capabilities and relationships. Not always, to engage and get proper stakeholder support for a local project. There are. And then there's other just grid support and local reliability benefits. So when you weigh those factors, it's a much easier and important opportunity to be able to run to the ground and say, okay, what really is the capability? What communities are interested? In the past, we didn't do this because economics just really didn't make sense. Now, I still think it's going to be pricier capacity probably than if we could go out and build 1,000 megawatt plant. But the distributed benefit of it might actually be worth more. Demand response is something else that we've been looking at. I think it's going to go slower, but we still are obligated there. Demand response is here to stay. It is a tool that's used across electric systems across the United States. Obviously, when electricity system reserves decline, demand response becomes a more important tool, and that's actually getting end-use customers to actually drop their load during certain times. I get all the complications of it. I've done it before in my life, so I'm not oblivious to the challenges of executing on it. But when you're in a system where there's scarcity for capacity, you want to turn over every stone. And if there are industrial customers in the member communities that we serve, or even commercial customers that are willing to actually curtail load during emergency periods, we want to know about it. And we want to work with them. The MPPA asset site optimization. So right now, when we originally built the Kalkaska CT, and there's a lot of problems with Kalkaska CT, but they really are more contractual problems. But the site is in an industrious area. I mean, right next door is a fracking gas facility. It was originally built, in fact, there's actually a separate electric system there to actually accommodate another generator. So we are actively now trying to explore, hey, could we put 10 or 15 or maybe 20 megawatts of fully dispatchable recip engines there? And that could be a really unique use of a site. Again, where getting a permit, getting the site readiness, could be a huge advantage that we want to explore. We also are, we have 9 of our members that take what's called wholesale distribution service. So they're served off what's called a 46 kV system. You're got a 138 kV coming in here, but some of our members are served off the 46 kV system. Well, we hold rights to move power over that system, which means we could locate a plant in the consumer's energy service territory connected to that 46 kV, and we could serve any of those 9 members with it and not have to go to the transmission grid. So these are the kinds of unique ideas that we're really trying to explore. And then finally, strategic partnerships. I figure you'll probably ask me, what do I mean by that? Well, kind of a similar answer, but sorry. So, so strategic partnerships, one of the things I've been thinking about a lot lately is, and it's probably because I've got a guy coming to speak at our stakeholder meeting, and I've been talking to some of these big tech companies. We have some NDAs with those. If Detroit Edison can't serve the data center either, they have to build a power plant, well, then we're in the same spot. So why don't I just work with Apple? If Apple comes to me, they want to build their own power plants. They want to basically do it themselves. Obviously, they're going to have someone else come in and do it, but they're willing to take all the power supply from them. So if they want to build a 500 megawatt plant, we'll take 100 megawatts. They have better credit than Detroit Edison does. I mean, I'd rather have Amazon or Apple be a joint owner of the power plant that I'm an option to than Detroit Edison or Consumers Energy. They have better motivations, actually. They want the cheapest power. They want reliable power. They're actually a better partner, quite frankly. So they're really a new kind of customer that never existed before. And so, again, so we're exploring those things. We're also looking at, even despite everything I said earlier, again, Detroit Edison, they just made this announcement that they've got like 2 gigawatts of data centers coming to their system. They're going to have to build new power plants. We have a much better relationship with them, so it might be a case where, hey, can we carve off a piece of one of these plants? We'll own it. We don't need to. We can separately own it. If we jointly own it, the way I would write that contract would be way different than we wrote the contracts back in 1982. So, and then you have these interesting things like Palisades. I mean, one of the off-takers of Palisades is in Indiana Co-op. So there's an opportunity there that might work out a deal where we take some of the power supply locally in Michigan, and then that contract will allow them to source some local supply. So there's some different structures that we're looking at, and in the way, if you read our strategic plan, it says all of the above. We got to think differently about things. So, any questions there before I hit the gas pedal there? And
Are you speaking at the stakeholders again this year?
I am, yeah.
Are you gonna be covering some of these things again, or?
I hope so. I'm
Just like a beta test run?
Yeah. See if there's any heckling going on. Yeah. I've got to be a little more careful there because I have a shorter window of time, it's a bigger audience, and I don't want to bore people to tears. So I've got to find a jazzy way to talk about this stuff. But yes,
I did find it more.
yeah. All right. Next slide. So Charlie specifically asked me to address an issue here about this thermal behind the meter generation. And I normally do not throw tons of words on slides. That's usually a no-no. But for those of you that want to read this later, the basic point here is, hey, Pat, how in the heck can you be, advocating us putting more thermal power generation in when you have an energy legislation requirement that says by 2040 it has to be 100% clean? How did you arrive at that conclusion? Well, there's a couple simple things. First of all, the Michigan energy legislation doesn't say it has to be clean capacity, it says it has to be clean energy. And as Charlie just discussed moments ago, these units don't run all the time. Most of the energy during the year is coming from somewhere else. These units run when they need to run. If you put new units in another community, presumably that's going to be the same way. And even if they are dispatched more, you can manage the dispatching, but you can still provide the reliability. You can manage dispatching by making offers that are, aren't going to get accepted in the marketplace. So why do I care about that? Well, because 2040 is still a long ways away. And if you're only talking about 5 to 10% of your total energy needs that you might have to buy extra renewable energy for, I would rather take that risk and deal with it in 15 years than to worry about not being reliable and providing affordable power the next 5 years. So, in addition to that, the legislation provides, as written, actually 3 different options, but 2 are actually wired into law. You have the ability to extend out to 2044. So now you're talking about, kind of 18 years-ish, potentially. And then in the legislation, it further says that if you need more time, then you have to, sit down with whoever. And here's the bottom line. If MPPA or the co-ops are saying we need more time, likelihood the investor-owned utilities, there's a problem in the marketplace. The other thing, though, that I really, really believe in more than any of the other stuff, I do believe in technology. I'm a big, big believer in technology. And I just think what's happened just in the last 10 years of my life, I cannot imagine what's going to happen in the next 10 years. But it's going to be remarkable. I know it's going to be. And so I would rather deal with the possibility that we have to put some kind of back-end technology in 2035 that didn't exist in 2025 then. So for those reasons, we're confident in this strategy. And so that's why we've been sitting down with members and talking to them about it, because we feel like this really integrates well with affordable and reliable power supply strategy. And that's, I got asked, I spoke at the Bay City Council back in February. Beautiful building, theater, crazy. But anyway, I was talking and a guy asked me after, he said, hey, how are you going to meet this 2030, 50% renewables? Give me some kind of long-winded answer. I said, I don't know. I don't know. But I do know that I have to provide you reliable and affordable power in the meantime. And so, we have some ideas, and I'll get into those with you. And I did talk about buying renewable energy credits and so forth. But I want to be honest with you, I don't think anybody really knows, quite frankly. Okay, next slide. Well, first of all, any questions about this?
And for comments, I did ask Pat to pause on this. This is something that is probably new to every board member here. Outside of, I don't know if you guys were on the board when we invested in Kalkaska, but or AFEC, but we haven't had a lot of conversations about adding thermal resources. 2012. So it's definitely a significant shift, but I think it's important to highlight, important to understand, and important to see the alignment with this shift with the greater industry shifts. And really just wanted to hit home on this because it's something that will be a reoccurring conversation for many years to come, I think.
Yeah, and we're not arrogant enough just to throw that stuff on the paper. Better agree with us. I mean, we know we have to sit down with communities, and like I said earlier, every community has different demographics. The governing body setups in all our communities are different. Some only have city councils. So there's going to have to be a lot of conversation here, and we won't always agree. But then there's just the risk management question too. At some point, the alternatives are just not available. So next slide. So I tossed this on there. This is your Lowell forecasted capacity position. So you can see that you're in pretty good shape through what's called 28-29. So that's May of 29. And then following year 29-30 and 30-31, you start to show a deficit. There's also some other scary stuff, not to really get people scared, but I'm scared. I'm worried. And I've been having my wholesale guys argue. But MISO is trying to change the rules, not surprisingly. They're fast and furiously. And they're trying to make what we call these resources that are sitting out here, MISO calls them load modifying resources. They're also called behind the meter generators. But they're load modifying because when they run, they reduce your load as far as the wholesale market's concerned. They don't actually inject energy into the market. They just reduce the much power that's coming over your meter. So it's a load modifier. Well, they're trying to change the rules to make those more like resources in front of the meter in terms of all of the administrative and operational requirements, which adds to the complexity and the intensity of operating and managing those units. So we're obviously pushing back on those and trying to come up with some kind of compromise. And they're going to file with FERC here, they say by the end of this month. This is near-term stuff. We might have to file a complaint at FERC. We won't be the only ones, just be MPPA. One of the things we don't want to have happen, and trust me, many of our members have really old, antiquated. I kind of have this kind of funny visual. A guy gets a call at 3 a.m. and he lights up his cigarette, drives down and kicks the thing a few times. It pulls on the pole starter and eventually fires up. That image is in my head with some of our members. And, you know, obviously those kind of units, they're not going to work going forward. We have to have more sophisticated operations. Okay. So this is kind of where we're shooting for here is this 2030 timeframe is when we really got to hit the ground running. And, you know, the numbers get big when you start looking at all our members.
And our short position coincides close. I'm not sure if it's 100%, but we're very much a microcosm of MPPA as a whole.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
29-30 timeframe as a whole, because we gets a little nuancy, but MPPA is the market participant. MISO doesn't necessarily care what's happening in Lowell. Everything is pretty much aggregated through MPPA. So like this current planning year, or the planning year we're getting ready to come up to, we had a short position in spring, right, Casey? Yeah, we had a slight short position in spring, but MPPA as an agency had a long position and capacity. So we were able to true up our short position to an intra-agency transaction. To MISO, that doesn't matter to them. So we have part of those advantages of joint action. We were able to fill our short position through a very similar like-minded community, public power, member of MPPA. That 2029, 2030 range, our short position looks like a small piece of MPPA short position.
Yeah. And so this is maybe a little bit of, we have what is called a virtual meter with MISO. You might say, is it? Well, it's called a commercial pricing node, a CP node. And what sits behind that is all of our members. So all their physical meters are sitting behind this. Really, it's a virtual meter. So when Charlie says we kind of interface, all of your load aggregated is all they see coming into our CP node. And, you know, Holland, Zealand, and Grand Haven, and Lowell, and Bay City, all their loads are settling inside of that CP node. I liken it to a virtual meter. So anyway, next slide. So Michigan energy legislation, I don't need to spend too much time here, but I did want to make sure that you understand. So these are the renewable energy requirements, and these are the clean energy requirements. And the clean energy requirements, if you were wondering what the heck that is, well, renewables are so to meet the clean, but you can't meet the clean to meet renewables. So it's a one-way ticket. Say that. So you might ask, well, what the heck's clean? Well, it's everything that's not renewable but doesn't have carbon emissions. So nuclear or a gas plant that has carbon capture. Those are the two options. Unless someone invents something new, which we don't know today, but that's it.
Well, then where do batteries fit in to that?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not really a generation.
Well, batteries actually are
they're
low too.
they're
Batteries
low, yeah.
consume electricity, and then so all batteries are doing is trading. Take electricity that's already been produced, and then they send it back out again. So they're kind of they're not a producer or a consumer. They're just a trader of electricity.
Right.
Yeah. So let's go to the next slide here. Yep. So you know, this is just an idea of kind of what's happened. I mean, we've done 8 projects, I think $1.3 billion in power purchase agreements we've executed in the last 10 years. Incredible amount of power. So now most of our members are in sort of that mid-20s. There's a little conversation that Charlie's going to hear more of. I think Steve might touch on a little bit in the board meeting tomorrow, but we also have been buying some RECs and we're not properly showing those in these position reports. It's getting very confusing. So you actually have more RECs and you have more renewables than that according to Michigan law. But the bottom line is, think about how you get from 20 to 50 in 5 years. Pretty staggering requirement. So I'm going to talk about the challenges of that with the next slide. Unless you have questions about this slide. Go ahead. Do you have a question? So this might be helpful, and this might not be new, so sorry if it's boring, but when you look at energy production on the left and reliability production on the right, this is kind of how you look at wind, solar, and gas and nuclear. So solar in Michigan's about 22% of the year produces energy. That's 22% of the 8,760 hours in a year. Wind's about 35%. And then combined cycle gas and nuclear, is above 80%. When you look at the reliability, that's the amount of capacity that a resource provides. In this term is called accredited. Solar is in that 30% range now. Wind's 15%, and gas and nuclear are 85%. So before I get into what changes are coming, you can see already how much more of the wind and solar you would need to equate just mathematically to the gas and nuclear. You need a lot more. And there's a lot of problems because solar and wind take up a lot of property. Solar is about 10 acres a megawatt. Wind's about 60 acres a megawatt. So you have these huge swath of land that's required, and it's becoming very, very complicated, which is why these permits are getting harder and harder to get. But there's another problem. MISO is changing the rules, so is PJM, to these new, they call accreditation rules. So they're actually lowering, what they're doing is they're creating this dynamic formula where the amount of capacity that the solar is allowed and wind is allowed to provide, they call that accredited, changes with the amount of solar and wind that's actually being installed in the grid. So the more that's on the grid, the less benefit you get. Sounds counterintuitive. I'm happy to get into it after this. Otherwise, I'll get scrambled people's brains with. It's called the effective load carrying capacity. Anyway, long story short, when we forecast it out, in years, if much of the solar is actually built as they say, it may not be. We're getting less than 5% of the nameplate of the solar is actual deliverable capacity. So that's a real problem. So when I said earlier, this resource adequacy, we did a bunch of projects. Look at all of them, man. We have a ton of solar. It was providing 50% of what we installed as capacity. And now we're being told by MISO that in 10 years it could be 5%. Well, we're losing an incredible amount of capacity from what we thought we had. Very scary. Next slide. Yeah.
So
or not.
this is probably a very stupid question. So when we're looking at that, I'm just trying to do the math. So we got 22%, 35%, and 80%.
Mm-hmm.
So what is that? I mean, because my brain's thinking 100%. So what am I missing?
Yeah. So think of if there's 8,760 hours in a year. If a power plant produced the exact highest capability and it ran every single hour of the year and it maximum produced its maximum capacity, that would be 100%.
Okay.
Well, no power plant does that. So most nuclear plants, when you look at the total megawatt hours they produce in a year, and you multiply that times their capacity, the size of the unit, say it was 1,000 megawatts, and you multiply 1,000 megawatts times 8,760 hours, that equation would divide it into the actual energy they produce to be called their annual capacity factor.
Okay.
And so most nuclear plants and combined cycle gas plants are anywhere between 80 and 100.
So, okay. So what you're doing is that's 80%. That's how much energy the capacity of that. It's not, you're not saying,
And what I'm saying is it,
Right.
your solar is only operating 22% of the time, but it provides out of, yes, in here. And relating that to what capacity you get from it and drawing that comparison between energy and capacity. It used to be coal plants. They run, you get your energy, you get your capacity from the same location. But as MISO's changing the rules on capacity, you're getting proportionally less capacity than you are energy off of some of these resources. And it's not they're not very aligned, and the goalposts keep moving every time there's rules.
So think of it this way. So if you had you have legislation that's passed in states, and just honestly, just really customers that want more renewable energy, and I understand. But the resources right now primarily are wind. Those are the two we have. And I think the best way to think about it is if you had a system that was operating with power plants that were producing 80% of their capacity as energy per year, and all could be used for reliability purposes. Now you're retiring these, and you're replacing them with resources that produce energy, say 28%. Well, that shows you how complicated the equation becomes, like how much more of those resources you have to install to equate to the same level. And it gets even worse when you think about these new MISO tariffs that are what I call decrediting. They're actually lowering the accreditation. So MISO has no authority to tell Michigan what to do. Michigan has its own energy legislation. So all they're doing is sending price signals. So they're saying, hey guys, do whatever you want, but these solar resources you're putting in, you might get 10% of 100 megawatts, 10 megawatts. That's all you're gonna get from reliability. So you figure out how to deal with that. We have the obligation to have a reliable electric system. Okay, so what does this mean? So kind of like the slide I talked about earlier with resource adequacy, I think of this as we've done an incredible amount in the last 10 years. The pace and size of contract that we've done has been unbelievable. Like I said, over $1 billion worth of contracts. A couple of them haven't even come online yet. We're waiting actually any day now. Might even be tomorrow morning. One of our other plants is going to COD, Brentwoods. We expect Whitetail to come online in November, so we'll bring on 2 more this year. And then we have 1 more, Art Solar, supposed to come on in 26, and they've let us down 1 million times. I'll do it another time, but so we're taking a pause, not entering into any more 20-year PPAs for, not saying we won't enter anymore, we will, presumably, but we have a couple other things we need to do that are more important. I'll talk about that. What's the other thing that's slowing us down? Well, I just said earlier, PPA prices. I think I answered your question earlier by saying they were, I think we did $42 a megawatt hour for 20 years. That same deal now is $2 a megawatt hour. That's a huge jump. When I talk about our members' budgets and affordability, I mean, this is another area that's very concerning. Project development delays. Everything we dealt with after 2021, has been delayed. Every single one. The MISO tariff accreditation derating that I just spoke about, another thing we're trying to analyze and understand.
I'm still trying to figure out what you mean by tariff in this context.
Yes. So in the wholesale marketplace, we have to abide by tariffs just like your retail customers do. So tariffs are really just prices, and they're products. So there's the simplest one is energy. We dispatch energy in the market, we get paid the locational marginal price. That's a calculated value of energy. If we provide certain ancillary services, we get paid an ancillary service. MISO has a tariff. It's on file at FERC that says, this is how we accredit resources in our system. This is how we value the amount of capacity. They're changing those tariffs, along with many other things, but that's just one. It's a rule book, yeah. It's like the NFL changing the way kickoffs work in the NFL now. It's like, this is annoying, but that's a new kickoff. And the NFL teams have to abide by it. And then this intermittent resource portfolio. Well, it was one thing when we had 5% of our portfolio was from renewables, another thing was 10%. At 20%, we're starting to see some really interesting stuff with our portfolios. Planning has become very hard. And the best way to think about this is when we put a wind or solar project in our portfolio and we expected it to produce 5,000 megawatt hours in October of 2026. And we get to October 26 and it produces 2,000 megawatt hours, which you can. That's on a percentage basis, that's over a 50% difference. Well, guess what? We got to get the energy from somewhere else. Well, what happens if in 2026 prices are $100 megawatt hour instead of 40? Well, now we got to replace it with $100 megawatt hour power. We had no intention to do. We didn't plan on that happening. That's the problem when you get these highly variable resources. When it was only 5% of our portfolio, it really didn't have an impact on your cost of electricity. Now it does. Okay, so what's our action plan? Well, we just executed a renewable energy credit transaction. What does that mean? Well, the law allows us to buy renewable energy credits. Those are the attributes that are created for every megawatt hour that a renewable resource produces. So instead of going out and contracting for 20 years for someone to build a brand new resource, we can enter into a contract with an existing resource it's already on the ground and just buy the RECs from them only, not buy the energy and all the other attributes that go with it. That contract can be much shorter, much less expensive, and it doesn't have another little component, which I'm going to talk about next, which is intermittency costs. So that little example I gave you about October 2026, we call that the intermittency cost risk. We're spending in a ton of time. In fact, we're going to roll it out this year, and it's going to be part of your future budgets. We're going to forecast what we think intermittency costs are. When we value any new PPA or ownership into a renewable resource, that's going to be part of our analysis in terms of what should we do the deal or not. So this is a big analytic exercise. Under the Inflation Reduction Act that was passed by Joe Biden, tax exempt entities are allowed to get what is called a electric pay, which is sort of the equivalent of a tax credit. We've been analyzing that substantially, trying to figure out, hey, can we own and use municipal debt and find a cheaper financing cost and lower cost of power by owning the renewable resource directly instead of entering a PPA. We had to do PPAs before because tax credits only could go to people who owe taxes. Taxes and didn't. We are upgrading our software systems so we can really handle this new regime of uncertain power supply, including batteries, which we refer to batteries as not intermittent, but they're energy limited. They can only dispatch for 4 hours per hour. So they have a limited energy capability. And then we're really trying to study the long-term market. I mean, where are power prices going? So we feel like our members are served better if we accomplish these things now than to rush out there and enter into another power. We need to figure out all of these factors, and so we can start making good decisions.
And I would say if the board will remember, it was in 9 years, 7. I don't remember the term. The Energy Plus Rec transaction that I brought. What was that?
Months ago.
3 months ago, maybe. Yeah, it was end of December because we wanted to transact before the end of December. So that's a piece of this whole strategy.
Yeah.
And leverage really was a new structure. Kind of that one deal hits on a lot of what Pat's talking about with new structures, finding those unique values, finding new partners. There's just a different way of looking at our power supply and pairing up two different products. We do bilateral transactions to buy power all the time. MPPA is buying and selling RECs on our behalf. This is just kind of combining things all into one deal, but it really afforded us a little bit more opportunities for compliance in the earlier years of the legislation's requirements, and it's taking advantage of an opportunity that is uniquely available to municipalities too.
I think let me just see on our slide. We can just to Oh, no, it's it. Hey, what do you know? So I did want to touch on a point though here. You know, we want to build. We do. But what we don't want to get into is a bidding war with a bunch of investor-owned utilities who don't have the same financial motivation that we do. So the market is like any other market for any other products. When there's more demand than supply, the sellers rule. And right now, that's what's happening in the renewable market in Michigan. The investor-owned utilities have an insatiable appetite for renewables. And so they're just swooping up every deal they can find. And we're just not going to get into a bidding war with them right now. We need to let the dust settle. And we also have some really important work to do in the meantime. The other thing is everybody got a goodie bag on the legislation. The co-ops got a goodie bag with the way they can treat the nuclear power, which is hilarious. They're allowed to call that clean energy. They get certain rights that Detroit Edison, who has a nuclear plant, doesn't. Just shows you how asinine and sick legislation is. The investor-owned utilities got a bunch of goodie bags. A bunch. The only goodie bag we got really was our ability to use RECs for 100% of our requirements through 2035. Starting January 1st, 2036, we can no longer do that. So we can't just sit on our hands and go, buy renewable energy credits and then we'll worry about it in 2034 or something. No, we realize we can't do that. But we are going to take advantage of what leverage we do have because they've got other benefits that we don't. So we got to maximize and optimize ours. And that's what we're doing. And you might ask, well, where the heck do RECs come from? Well, when all these states created these renewable energy legislations, they had to grandfather a bunch of resources in because they were already considered renewable. Because obviously, if they didn't do that, there wouldn't be any RECs probably available. So you might ask, well, where the heck did you get these RECs from? Well, we bought them from Texas. Yeah, from a giant, huge hydro plant in Texas. It's actually in MISO. And under the legislation, we're allowed to buy renewable energy credits from anywhere in MISO. So that was the unique deal that we did. You know, whether we'll do more of those or not, I don't know, because we prefer to do projects in Michigan, obviously. We had one member, Traverse City, who bowed out at the last minute. I've never had that happen ever in my 9 years of MPPA. After they already committed to do it, yeah, never had that happen. But I thought it could happen, so I wasn't surprised. Because Traverse City's board wants what is called additionality. I don't know if anyone has heard of that term. But the simplest way to explain it is that they want to know that the renewable energy that they're using comes from a new resource, something that's brand new to the electric grid that actually topology of the electric system. So you can understand how somebody would want that. They might think, well, if you're buying a REC, that power plant already existed, so you're actually not really changing the composition of power supply in the electric grid. So I do understand why people feel that way. And honestly, we would rather have new resources too, but not if they're going to come at a highly unaffordable set of economics. So we're, again, just trying to leverage what we can. And this last little slide I actually used last year, I guess I have to come up with a new one. But, you know, it really is to signify what I said at the very beginning. Like, we need engaged members. We need members to be collaborating with us. It's too complicated of an industry. If I don't have the ability to come in here and have these kinds of conversations, it's really, really hard. You're unique. You're a smaller community, but you have a very engaged community. You have really smart people that work at the utility.
We do.
Not just, and a lot of our members don't have it. I mean, I was just in Eaton Rapids. I love Eaton Rapids. They have one guy, and he's running around fixing things. He doesn't have time to deal with any of this stuff, but he's the guy they're counting on. Now, fortunately, he got me in front. They have a city manager and so forth, but so you're lucky here, and it's not luck. You created your situation here. we're trying to educate our other members to do the same. It's hard. We have some incredible members who are unbelievably engaged, that they're big. They have lots of staff. But a lot of our smaller ones don't. They're counting on us more, and we're trying to help them.
I have just a couple questions. Is MPPA growing? So is there a way that your membership can grow? Do you want your membership to grow? I mean, I'm looking, like Ann Arbor's looking at, becoming a, public power, and there's certainly some other public powers in Michigan.
Yep.
So that's my first question.
Yeah, it's a good.
And then the other one is, I'm just gonna say, and I think you touched on it, but I believe Lowell wants to be a leader, wants to be a leader, but I'm gonna say that within our means.
Yeah.
I mean, we understand we're small, but again, if you look at our motto or whatever, our goal is to be a premier utility, and that's not just, and being a premier utility is, we encourage Charlie to, to be leadership roles in MPPA, ME, all these acronyms. But I'm just gonna say that I think you will get from our board a wanting to be a leader in the industry.
Let me go in reverse order then, because that tear might come down my face there, but unfortunately, and I don't hear that enough. And hear from some of our big members who kind of get that. From our smaller communities that are the size of you don't often see that. And but when you really look at the communities that are really successful, they have that in common. They have a very engaged board who understands how valuable their utility is to their community. That's the common thread you see when you go across the United States, not unique to MPPA. And so one of the things that I'm so passionate about, which I would rather not deal with all the stuff in the office, and I would love to just be in my car and visiting communities, because I feel like that's probably where my skill set is can be best utilized. It's hard to do when you have 22 employees. I got to be a player and a coach. But is trying to help those smaller communities understand that you'll be better off long term. Your rates will be lower, your reliability will be higher if you actually spend the time and energy to be engaged and invest in your utility, just like you would invest in your house or any other asset that appreciates each other. But it's hard. You probably know more about the way governing bodies are operated across these types of small communities and just in general. Sometimes people are only on these not because they're interested in the community, because they have their very own unique specific agenda of their own, and that's all they really care about. We have members like Bay City, 20,000 customers. They don't even have a utility board. They have a city council. So
And I'm just gonna toot our horn a little bit. We're a member of Michigan Public Power, we're a member of APPA, and an example, we're small, but we're, Monday, I'm leaving for California and hauling a trailer for our lineman's rodeo. We're gonna, we participate. We did, since COVID, when it was canceled, we haven't had the opportunity to get back into it. We did it for, 12 years straight, and we're heading, we got a crew, and we're heading back out. Happens to be in Roseville, California this year, but we are an active group that again, wants to be a premier
Yeah.
utility.
I think what's really interesting is like, we're in a period of time right now where the industry is such transition as far as the technology, and we don't know what's going to emerge really as being leading technologies. We don't know if small modular reactors are actually going to become
Right.
a reality. We don't know if packaged nuclear reactors will be able to be a part of the distributed energy system. We don't know if what's the other one that I'm thinking of? But anyway,
Politics.
yeah. Well, and here's the thing: it's like we can't even ask you what would be the best direction for us to go. What would be the best thing for us to invest in for the future? And nobody has that answer right now because everything is just, you know, in flux.
Yeah, my answer is different. I do have an answer for that.
Okay.
It's different than probably the way the utility industry was run 20, 30 years ago, which is you have never seen in all of our lifetime the rapid tech today. I mean, it is remarkable. I just listened to a podcast the other day on quantum computing. My head was spinning. I mean, there are so many things that could drastically change this business in the next 10 years. I could speak for. So the answer is this: don't make any big bets. Be diversified and be agile.
And this, it's kind of the same answer that gave me a few years ago, though I think with the intermittency issue, it may change your answer a little bit, but I mean, you basically said three things. You need to have long, skinny, and many as far as like purchase power contracts.
And be very agile. Don't be so committed to one thing, like look at what Holland did. They built a big power plant behind their meter. But they paid off the debt 3 years ago or 2 years ago. Because they were changes that were happening in business and they wanted to be agile, footloose and fancy free. So they ramped up payment. They were obviously a lucky community in terms of some communities aren't so lucky and they don't have that strong industrial base. So it's not, every community is different. If you're in St. Louis, Michigan, you don't have the luxury of being in Holland, Michigan. So you got to deal with the cards you've been dealt. But even Holland made that huge investment, but they even saw, wow, we don't want to be beholden to this resource. What if customers want to leave our system? What if they want to install local generation? We want to be agile. We want to be able to meet that customer's needs. So, I think the days of investing in one project for 30 years, going back and just cutting weeds and just making power, those days are over.
So back to my first question
Yes,
was,
your first question on growth. I kind of rely on my board a bit for this, not my own vacation. I would say it this way. We want to be very careful about disrupting our boardroom. If we want to add members, we want them to be added because they have a long-term view of joining the agency. If they're joining the agency because they want to solve a short-term problem they have, no way. So I sort of feel like member onboarding actually is one area where my board better have a big role, not just Pat Bolin or on the staff. I do agree with you though, that strategic membership growth can be valuable because it does provide more tools in the tool bag. But you got to be really careful because if you take on a member that's got financial risk in their community or they've got power supply needs that are so complicated because they haven't done anything for 10 years, or they're extremely opinionated and not willing to be a team player, then those aren't good members on board. So, but economies of scale is true, and I think we need to do. And so we actually have one municipal utility we've been talking to now for a while about onboarding. I think they are going to become an associate member here pretty soon, and then we're going to see if they should become a full member now. But want to take our time. It's actually an area where I'm going to defer to my board and say, hey, guys, like, this is time for you to step up and think about this, ask questions, and be engaged.
Yeah, and I can chime in from my perspective as a board member, with a vote. There's a significant interdependency, amongst participating members. I got to see a little bit of it firsthand with the, financing of the repowering of Bell River, and really the opportunity to peek under the hood as far as credit ratings and start to gain an understanding of exactly what happens with the participating members and how rating agencies look at members, and then from a PPA standpoint, how things are different. So one of the things that would be very important for me as a board member to place a vote is the tools that we use that I present to the board. MPPA has an amazing tool set called, I'll probably get it wrong, it's gone through different names, but they give us a credit scorecard every year. They give us a business model risk assessment. We're going to talk about it next month probably. But it's resources like that it's important to look at these members objectively and what do they bring to the table. And if they're not a value add, then I have to make sure that I'm, as a board member, I have to wear two hats. I've got to always be thinking about MPPA or our local community, but ultimately I have obligations to MPPA as a board of commissioners member there. And they need to be a value add for MPPA. They need to be a value add locally, and all the things that Pat talks about. Local control is fantastic until your desire for local control impacts other communities. Yeah. And I've not been put in a situation where I have to make that decision, but I've thought about it. Yeah.
I need to do a good job, and so to my staff, and educating thoroughly another board member for what's going on, and so they can make. We had years ago, there was a group of Indiana members that were going to join them, and we all sat in the office there for hours and hours and talked. And Dave Coster, one of our board members, was part of that discussion. He looked across the table at the fellow from Mishawaka, Indiana, which was about the same size as Howell in terms of electrical. He said, what's your goals? He goes, I just want to set it and forget it. And Dave said, well, that's not how it really works here. Like, you got to be involved. Setting and forgetting it.
That's not 50 years ago.
Yeah. And it was kind of right then we realized this isn't going to work.
And that gets back to MPPA is a project-based agency.
Right.
And all requirements when I was in Tennessee, it's very similar. TVA, they gave you a tariff. This is what you pay as a wholesale customer. And you take it. You can participate, you're a stakeholder, you can have some feedback, but ultimately it is set it, forget it. They're gonna deliver what they choose to deliver. At a project-based agency, you have real choice.
Right.
And you have the real ability to have your local decisions reflected at the agency level, where we were running into it in Tennessee. There's different communities, different community desires and needs, and you're limited in your ability to deliver on your community's values. But it does require quite a bit more involvement.
Yeah, right. It's not for everybody. I get that. So yeah, that's the answer. There's more to discuss there.
Does anybody else have any questions for Pat?
Sorry.
No.
So I've got one. You were talking about like Apple or Amazon building power and kind of being a customer.
Yeah.
Because they're the customer of power. And if it's an arrangement where we're such a minority that we don't have influence, then we're effectively a customer of that, right?
Yeah.
So I thought it was really interesting and kind of look at that and say we're more of a customer. But then they're seeing the customer perspective and that they want the power.
Yeah.
Too.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we're looking to get out of that. So that's kind of like a change in the role. But I was curious if there's, are there other roles that are changing? Because we talked about the technology changing and sort of this whole, the environment that we're kind of running into.
Yeah.
Because you mentioned that, MPPA's role has changed. But I remember, I think my very first board meeting, Perry had said, we're the only company that tells people to use less of what we sell. Right. And I was like, well, I don't think we sell anything. We're a service provider, right?
Mhm.
And that's kind of,
Mhm.
and then there's been that kind of transition, I feel like.
Yeah.
But I guess, are there any other roles like that do you think are going to change?
Oh, yeah.
And any you particularly might know of, or?
Yeah, I mean,
How we would operate, or?
Absolutely. Too spooky in terms of all the technology that's going on, but I mean, the load-sided technology, historically has always relied on people's decisions, right? And but I just see artificial intelligence being such huge game changer there, where it's acting as the human, it's making all those decisions, and so that's why I see just a much more interactive utility business where there's really smart AI controlled electric loads inside our member systems. Again, it's not gonna happen tomorrow, but
Within a generation.
within a generation, that's gonna happen. Yeah, you're seeing, used to be the day, like I said earlier, utilities, they invest in the power, they produce the power, people pay the rate. And now you're seeing some of these customers that actually use more power than an entire utility produces. And so it used to be back in the day, like you might have one steel mill that was like that, but now you're having literally hundreds of data centers. And so you're seeing these customers wanting to buy power plants, co-locating next to power plants now, where the power plant never even sends a megawatt hour into the electric grid, it stays local. I think the business models, the type of participants that are in these are changing. We're seeing some new technologies on the combustion side where, you might be able to burn other kinds of fuels. So there's this constant evolution, and I just think that the pace of that change is really the thing that I remember sitting in my interview, which was kind of a weird interview because I was sitting in this boardroom and there was a bunch of people on the table on a camera. It's kind of strange, but I remember telling them, I said, whether you hire me or not, the reality is that customers are going to be knocking on your door. And yes, for some smaller communities, that wasn't going to happen at the same pace. And I fast forward to today and I see how engaged we are with the customers of our members. It's remarkable. And, they're going to be much more influential in how the electricity business operates than they were, in the previous years. So, yeah, no, there's also the stuff behind the curtain you can't see, like the way we call it market operations, the way that works today it's just completely different than what it was even 5 years ago. So, yeah, a lot to get into. I could go on for hours with the changes that we do expect to see in the coming years. And, that's kind of my responsibility, I think, to really help our members understand that. Some of the bigger ones might be that are more involved in their daily activities of the power business are closer to it, but the small ones might have a city manager that's our board member. They're fixing the town clock and dealing with other issues, power supplies.
Okay, we're gonna,
Oh, thank you.
go ahead.
What's kind of the timeline on the thermal BTMGs, like the
Yeah,
recips and
so we have a defined 2025, we call them strategic objectives. So they fall under our strategic plan. So by the end of 25, there's a report that we have to produce. And that report basically is going to outline what the total capability we think is after we've met, I think already with all 22 members. What the, where that's distributed across the membership. We call them in-flight opportunities where the community's engaged enough. They've already got us momentum. They've already had a stakeholder support effort underway. They've got site capability. So there's, so at the end of the year, there's a report that's going to get generated. That's going to give the directions to where that power supply is going to come from, how much it is. And then in 2026, it's now to work on those projects to see, and it's going to drop, right? You're going to, I'm making up, we're going to come in at 25, and it looks like there's going to be 80 megawatts of capability. By the time we get to 26, going into 27, it's go. Projects are a go. So at that point, that 80 megawatts is probably going to drop down to some other number. Maybe it's going to be 50. Because you're going to run into gas pressure problems in communities, or some cost thing that you didn't anticipate, or a permit problem, or community revolt or something. There's going to be problems.
Sure.
Something's going to happen. And so, yeah, the plan is that to design those projects and then if we actually go to implementation in 27.
And they'd be similar projects. So
Yeah.
Design one, you could kind of
Similar. Yeah.
copy
Yep.
large parts of it to the next
Yep.
one.
So that's the other thing. In 26, there'll be a lot more engagement with technology providers. Right now, we're really focused more on, we are working with technology providers. Like Caterpillar gave us this really great assessment tool that they use. So we've been using that. We're also working with an environmental firm. We're also working with a firm that helps with power supply, power distribution analysis. So again, this year is all about getting like a 75% confidence level of the capability, and then 2026 will be 90%, 95%, with the goal of moving forward on projects. And then the hope is, and we might have to fast forward some things because it takes a long time to get transformers and other things and equipment orders. So we'd like electricity from those units to be available in 29. That's the goal. Seems like far away, but it's not.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else? Not, we're gonna take a 5-minute break. Restroom, grab something to eat or whatever, and
Get back at it.
thank you. and
Right.
Get this over with.
We're good to go.
Okay, moving on to the second item in the action, B.
All right, so we're gonna talk draft budgets. Again, we have no new board members, so this shouldn't necessarily be a surprise to the board. So what I thought I would do is just wanted to talk a little bit about the process. And I really want to focus on power supply. If you looked at the budget before the meeting, our power supply is highly disrupted or anticipated to be highly disruptive in terms of our costs. So we'll touch on some of those, but again, just wanted to highlight kind of how, and I think it's a good piggyback and having Pat in here. You hear about the systems that they have in place and the robustness around their power supply management and modeling and forecast. So what we do to start the budgeting process is and really it's not even included here, is we constantly work with MPPA to fine tune our forecast. They have all the models, but as we have large industrial loads come online, or we have significant, we have load addition that deviates from a standard load growth pattern. Think about the large investment from our largest customer and how much that changed. So we're constantly working with MPPA, but really the foundation of our budget starts with the power supply forecast coming from MPPA. And I say it starts there because it has assumptions of our load and then all the resources it's going to meet our load. So we take that power supply forecast, and really there should be an arrow back and forth between the top right kind of, but our power supply forecast has to work in concert with our revenue projections. Basically what we look at is MPPA is forecasting us to need to procure 93,000-ish megawatt hours next fiscal year. We need to make sure that we're not planning revenue off of 93,000 megawatt hours because there's losses. So what we do is we take that forecast and we look at we do two things independently. We look at forecast. We also look at our revenue. And revenue, we go back and look at historic sales and trends in sales. And we do the same thing. We try to forecast that forward. But we have to make sure that that power supply forecast and those revenues align. So we set a target sales goal of approximately 4% less than our power supply needs. And those are just losses. So with those two numbers and them working together, we also have to look at the power cost adjustment. Power cost adjustment is a critical piece to that revenue. We have to make sure that we are recovering adequate revenues to meet our power supply costs. If not, we're just eating into our ability to reinvest in the system. And we'll see what happens when you get mismatches or misalignments between power supply and your revenue. So kind of start there, and that's the foundation. Money makes the world go round. We started, how much money are we going to bring in, and what's our biggest bill? Everything that's left, we get to use to invest in here. And we'll touch on what percentage of our overall revenue that power supply makes up. But then it just kind of rotates through, and we start looking at maintenance and operations. The income statement that you all see in your board packet every month tend to be, those are more inflationary type of increases with small tweaks based on unique projects or things that would hit the budget that year. Example is if we do substation testing. That's not something that hits the capital budget. That's something that it's a maintenance expense. So we factor in any of those one-off or things that are not cyclical. Those get factored into our maintenance and operations expenses. And then ultimately that provides us with essentially a cash flow that can ultimately, cash flow that can be reinvested into the system, can go into a cash balance. And so it flows over into that capital budget. And we have targets for our capital budget. When we do updates with UFS and we do our rate studies and our plans, it's always there's always a target capital budget included. And we tend to have our capital budget. We pushed it with this last couple rate studies. We pushed it out a little bit to make sure that we're exceeding depreciation, but our capital budget target is in the $1.1 to $1.25 million range. And then we also have to make sure that from a budgeting perspective, we're budgeting for any cash growth that's necessary to maintain 120 days of operating expense, or any cash expense that doesn't necessarily, it's not necessarily reflected anywhere else, or is only reflected on the balance sheet, or whether that's inventory purchase, large inventory purchases, or
Grandpa's in a meeting. It's today your birthday
it's our birthday.
today?
Oh, we should step away. So happy. But then that does flow into the cash. But then it all, it's not a linear process. And once you kind of run through it, you always have to go back and just like a strategic planning process or a continuous improvement. If where you land doesn't necessarily reflect where you need to land, you really have to start all the way back at the beginning and really look at. And it's what happened this year, honestly, with Megan and I. We went through everything, and you kind of look to see where the chips land. And we knew that there were some significant disruptions this year, and we'll get into that when we get into power supply. But it wasn't anything drastic, but we didn't quite land where some of the targets needed to land, and everything works together, but somewhat has to be developed independently and then aggregated together. So we went back to the drawing board a little bit, really started back again with the MPPA power supply forecast and really digging into it. There's a lot of variables inside that power supply forecast, a lot of assumptions in there. But ultimately, again, everybody on the board has seen multiple budgets and has gone through multiple of these budget presentations, but I don't think I've ever touched on necessarily the process that we go through, and the factors and kind of how the different components of a budget ultimately come together. So I'm going to go to the next slide, Megan. So I thought we'd graphically represent a couple things here. And when I talk about, the importance of power supply and revenue working together, one of the things that we look at is power supply as a percentage of revenue. And it's just a good ratio to identify. There's more factors in it. It can be definitely an oversimplification, but it's a good indicator. As you can, fiscal year 2022 was a year we got hit with some very significant 22 and 23 power supply increases. There's NOx compliance. And if you'll notice that, so the blue line is our cost per megawatt hour. And we'll try to bring everything down to a per megawatt basis. We also look at revenue per megawatt and how do those two things work together. Not to be surprised, in 22, those two lines came together, and power supply as a percentage of revenue cranked way up. I'll draw your attention to our current budget. That is a drastic increase in our cost per megawatt hour, but you also see that revenue per megawatt hour aligns with those increases. But what doesn't necessarily match up is that percentage of our power supply. Our power supply is a percentage of revenue. So again, just want to highlight some of the components and really revenue and power supply. Revenue is the only source of revenue we have, obviously, counterintuitive, but that power supply being such a significant portion of our overall expenses, it's really important to monitor and watch. And from a cash management standpoint, all those costs flow into a PCA, but there's timing issues with that PCA. And that creates challenges when it comes to budgeting as well, because it really gets down to a much more granular level when you start evaluating what that power supply needs to be. Well, any questions on this graph?
So really, when our costs go up faster than the revenue, then the power supply increases in percent.
That is it. Yes, and it puts short-term pressure on us. It puts short-term constraints. We collect that over time because it all flows into the PCA, but it takes over a year for us to recover those. So as you get rapid changes in your power supply, you just have to be aware, monitor it, and understand what implications you could have moving forward, knowing that. And I bring it up because budget's a snapshot. Budget's a 1-year snapshot in a business that's been around for 130 years almost. And some things that are very impactful to the budget, crossover budget. The PCA is really what I'm getting at, is that PCA doesn't align nicely with our budget here. It aligns nicely with a smoothing pattern for our customers, so they don't see rate shock all at once when something out of our control ultimately really rapidly increases our price, our pricing to procure the service that we ultimately provide.
So do you think that kind of reflects the challenge of just forecasting that?
Oh yes, thank you.
Okay.
That's why it's here. I'm not trying to say we're going to miss the mark by any means, but I just want to share what the volatility looks like factually, where we are in the mix. Because I was talking with Daniel yesterday, and I don't remember exactly how you put it, but we're really in the eye of the storm is the way that we're kind of looking at it right now. And you can start to see that eye of the storm. So
the winds are picking up.
Yeah, not in a good way though. There's no wind turbines to capture that. No. But yeah, we're kind of in that. We hit this pun intended. Joked in banana now. That was a term we've heard is build absolutely nothing anywhere near anything or something. The acronym's off, but it's not NIMBY, not in my backyard. It's banana. Build absolutely nothing.
Yeah, everyone's backyard.
Yeah, pretty much. But yeah, that's exactly what we put this on here for, is to for one, show the volatility year to year, so that as we're gives more context as we're talking with Pat, we're talking about power supply. You really, as a standalone, just that one line, seeing that, and we'll go ahead and go to the next slide.
I imagine it was like a 20-year range, you're just gonna see it do this, right? As,
I don't think so.
no?
For the entire teens, it was incredibly stable. The market has been incredibly stable and
Okay.
forecasting has been very consistent to, kind of piggybacking off of Pat. I had no intention to, but I'll leverage what you said. He talks about for many, many years, it's cheaper to buy than build.
Mhm.
That was stability in the market. That was very much, there was no load growth. And now as you see, you see load growth coupled with, every state is implementing legislation similar to Michigan. So you're seeing multiple influences on the market that are really causing these up and downs. And to be fair, some of the earlier stuff was really environmental compliance related. When we had major run up in NOx compliance for our commitments to Bell River. So
Maybe it's not the eye of a storm, but the tremors and earthquake or volcanic eruption or something, right? So you have to make sure that we're ready for that.
yes,
That's what we're
yeah,
saying.
absolutely. It's a matter of prepare, be aware, monitor and adjust. That's really the gist of it. Yeah, Joe, which works perfect because that's included in the strategic plan update. So, but also wanted to touch base and just show the board how our power supply is drastically shifting over time. Actually, will you go back one slide? I want to highlight one more detail here. So the number to remember on the green line or the green line, the blue line. I'm colorblind. Okay. The blue line is 55.20. $55.20 a megawatt hour is the base power cost. So somewhere in here is the base power cost for our PCA calculations. Anything above this number is putting upward pressure on the PCA, and then below this number is putting downward pressure. You're seeing we were slightly above, somewhere around, we didn't put the line. You figure that's slightly above that 55.20. Jumps to closer to 70. That equates to $0.015 on a long term, $0.015 roughly on our PCA. Our base rates are, I'd have to look, base rates, combined energy and distribution, 11 cents a kilowatt hour at the residential level. I don't have it off the top of my head, 10, 11. So as a percentage, you're seeing, and it's important to remember that PCA, it's a pass through for us. Long term, it's a smoothing mechanism, but it's really a pass through of our variable expenses, our largest variable expense off to our customers. So there's no additional money for us to operate off of, but our customers still have to pay it. It's still a real bill impact to our customers. And if there's a $0.015, $0.015 per kilowatt or 1.5 cent PCA, that equates to a fairly significant end bill impact for our customers. So I don't want to downplay, that it's important component to our rates for stability over the long haul, and important to ensuring our ability to maintain a reliable and safe electric distribution system. But it's not without an impact on the end customer. We'll go ahead and go to the next slide, Megan. So this one is really wanted to show how our power supply is changing and evolving over time. So just to run through real quick, I'd say the bottom, but the year 20, I'll start with year FY 2021. The dark blue underneath the line is actually, we had surplus, we had a capacity was a net credit to us. So we had a surplus, we had a long capacity position. The planning reserve auction cleared at a really high price, and we were able to more than offset we were able to monetize that long capacity to something that actually was reflected. So we start there, but outside of 2021, it starts with Bell River, and these are in raw dollars too. No levelizing anything for our load growth or anything like that. It's truly just raw dollars. But it's Bell River, Campbell, Kalkaska, transmissions, this tiny little sliver. Then you get into market balancing, ESP, which is MPPA's energy services project. It's also where Pat's talking about bilateral transactions where we just go out and transact with a counterparty that has an existing resource for energy. Those flow through the purple, and then you can see the renewables and other, which is capacity for the most part, right, Megan? The others, a lot of it's capacity. The big thing's capacity and some other things. But what you'll notice, again, push out to FY 2026 budget, the makeup, the size of the bar graph grows significantly. That we saw reflected from the previous slide. It's very much not just load growth, it's load growth on top of increased power supply costs. But the makeup of our energy is changing significantly. Other thing, so what you see is the dollars for Bell River grow over time and then kind of stabilize a little. They grow over time and then they're going to reduce and stabilize. That FY 23 and some of elevated years were NOx compliance, but a lot of moving forward is new debt service with that, and then just the changing of operations. So you don't see a significant dollar change, but the megawatt hour output that will come out of Bell River is significantly different. Right now, Bell River is operating north of 70%, 70-80% capacity factor. They're projecting that when it's natural gas, it will run about between 20 and 30% of the time. So you're seeing our costs stay, and they fluctuate, yes, but they're still fairly stable, but the output is going to drop. Campbell, big piece of our overall cost. You'll notice in FY 26 that the orange section shrinks significantly, but it doesn't go away, but it will stop making power at the end of May. So there is no energy that comes off of that. It's just decommissioning and remediation expenses. And those numbers, remember who was in my office? You were. I showed Daniel the graph. 2021, July 2021, MPPA's estimated total expense for decommissioning and remediation for Campbell. So just MPPA's percent, which is about 8% of the total project, was roughly $4 million. As of December of last year, so 3.5 years later, it's north of $16 million. So if you extrapolate that out to the full plant, it's gone from $100 million remediation and decommissioning expense to a $400 million expense, roughly. The time horizon our commitment is going to last is significant as well. We've got commitments for the next 20, 25, 30 years. With those continued remediation expenses. So I go back to here, you see that pinching, but there's still, the energy's not there. And build the suspense. You also see Kalkaska, which is economically dispatched. Kalkaska only operates when it can produce power for cheaper than the market. That's not the same for all units. But Kalkaska, they put a bid in and say MPPA basically says, if market prices get to this point, this price, we will run. And it's bid in, and if it's bid into the market, if it's accepted at that price, market gets to that, Kalkaska has to fire up. So you'll notice that green bar grows significantly. Doesn't look significant, but you see it growing over time. Again, that's part of the energy makeup. That's part of rising energy prices, and energy prices rising faster than natural gas prices. So it's more economic. It is in the money more frequently. Really want to draw attention to the light blue one. Very small piece of this stat chart right now, but if you look back to 2020, it was almost non-existent. Transmission charges, without getting into all the weeds, that is good. That bar, or the height of that piece is going to grow significantly year over year. MISO currently has, I believe, about $35 billion in what they call multi-value projects, long-range or LRTPs as well, long-range transmission projects that are going to get rate-based. The transmission owner has raised rates annually to the tune of about 9% a year for the last decade. On top of that, and this is where it really gets into the weeds. Some of our investments in Bell River and Campbell came with what they called grandfather rights. We owned the transmission before, I think it was even before MISO existed. So when MISO was formed, the owners of these transmission lines were given grandfather status, and it's extremely advantageous to have that GFA status. We're losing a significant portion of those with the retirement of Campbell. So that transmission piece is going to grow. And then obviously to me, the most notable change is the purple. That is largely attributed to bilateral purchases. We have and it comes down to, it's the offset of reduced Bell River output, no Campbell output, and the fact that you hear Pat say, you heard Pat say you got a 4-hour notice from consumers that they were shutting things down. And then it takes 4 years to get through the queue. I think, 4 to 5 years to get through the queue, a year or two of planning to get to the queue, and then a year or two of construction. It's 9 years from concept to build it to a kilowatt hour. We don't have a ton of options when there are no new power plants being built, and the timeline to build those non-existent power plants is significantly longer than the window you've been provided to plan for. Your resource options are limited, and we're seeing that this year. This is when the rubber meets the road this year, and we're seeing significant increases in those bilateral contracts. They came in MPPA with their sophisticated modeling. They very much looked at price to value and have some pretty detailed analytical tools to identify when is a good time to transact in a bilateral market. They look at, what are price fluctuations, what's 1 standard deviation, what's 2, what's 3, and they really try to hone in on that price to value number. But the other thing that you'll notice is the top bar is growing as well, and that's that capacity piece where we're seeing assets retire. Obviously, Campbell, we're also seeing load growth here. So our capacity expense is growing and will continue to grow into the future. So I really wanted to stop and highlight this because I think this is the first year of a trend that will replicate this year after year after year. I hope there's not as big a jump, but I'm not optimistic otherwise because I don't know many of those I don't know many of those sections that are going to shrink. So yeah, this all bakes into the income statement and really gets back into the cycle of our power supply or our budgeting process. So if you'll go to the next slide. I don't think there is another slide. Yes. So if you would, we'll start all the way. Actually, we'll start here at the top. In some notable things, in the revenue, we are projecting about an $800,000 increase. But there are certain things that we need to continue to fine tune between now and the final budget. And again, it starts with revenue and power supply. We're budgeting approximately we're budgeting a 7.35% increase in revenue. Based on MPPA's forecast, that is not an increased forecast of kilowatt hour sales. As we look class to class, residential sales have kind of been in the middle of the pack, and even with load growth or even with housing growth, we've not seen a direct correlation to actual increased sales. We've talked about that a lot. And then in the commercial industrial side, there's a lot of speculative talk right now with very little firm timelines. There's an Aldi, there's a vacant Dollar General, there's a vacant Rite Aid, there's vacant cannabis stores, there's a vacant urgent care office. So there's a lot of opportunity for growth, but nothing imminent, nothing that we're going to take to the bank. Because when you grow your sales and you project additional kilowatt hour sales, you're projecting additional margin, obviously, and you're projecting additional operating revenue, obviously over and above that power supply offset. So we didn't want to get overly aggressive. So I also say that 7.35% growth, with power supply being approximately 50% of our 50% of our revenue. You would expect our power supply bill to go up about double that. If you would go down to power supply, quick. So you go to power supply, we're budgeting a 23% increase in power supply. There's more fine tuning there, but I don't want to get over aggressive in, we know we can't adjust kilowatt hour sales. The one big variable in this is that PCA, and the PCA and timing becomes just challenging to forecast because there's so many variables that go into that PCA. Any assumption that you put in there. So what we've done is really look at a few different factors, and we've come to a number from a PCA standpoint that is not overly aggressive, I would say. It's higher than I care to budget for, but it's a byproduct of that power supply. Beyond that, and when we hit these, if you go big bucket to big bucket and you start with generation expenses, we're looking at about a 6% increase over projections. That's the only thing I want to touch on. If you look at the 2025 budget, it's at $292,000. Again, that includes the gas regulator station that we expensed at the audit time last year. So that's why we're forecasted to be at that $151,000-ish at the end of the year. So not a significant increase at all. If you kind of go across the board, distribution expenses, we're very modest increase. A lot of that is labor driven. We're anticipating having an extra body with us, but one of our new hires has moved on to another opportunity. So we're kind of more at a steady state. I'd also say there's also more money going over into the capital budget. I think that's a lot of why our income statement is under budget, or this year, as Zach's guys have been really put the gas pedal to the floor and have been working very diligently on our capital projects. And there's more labor going to the capital projects, so less labor is being reflected here. Again, beyond that, happy to touch on anything. Sorry, we go back up. One thing I do want to touch on is you see that big jump, 35% in total customer accounting expense. What Megan and I did with the budget this year was we really pushed with the EOC, which is energy optimization. It's EWR. It goes by a lot of different names, but next year is when the new law kicks in that we have to hit 1.5% of our sales on an annual basis. Some of the initial numbers we've seen there are to hit 1%, between 3 and 4% of gross sales. To hit 1.5%, you can do the math. There's some additional things, potentially 5-6% of gross sales would need to go to that. That's going to have to be an offsetting revenue. But what we looked at is, what does the budget support? So we pushed that budget line item to $200,000, up from, it's almost $100,000 increase from what we actually forecast, but about a $70,000 budget increase. Nobody's committed to that by any means, and to hit the actual goals, we are going to have to implement an updated EWR, or energy optimization charge. Right now, our energy optimization charge brings in about $120,000 a year, or is forecasted to next year about $120,000. So there were no corresponding increases in revenue baked into the budget for that. And there's some other nuances there. That program follows a calendar year, not a fiscal year. So there's some pieces there. The timing is another challenge. So wanted to stop there. we can keep, let's just we'll head all the way down to operating incomes. Again, we're budgeting for operating income. Not nearly where we are forecasted to hit this year, but fairly in line with our budget this year. And a lot of our deviation from the budget this year is tied to significant increases in working capital being factored into the PCA calculation and collecting for some historic charges that actually were reflected in cash balance hits in previous fiscal years. But it's ultimately, PCA ultimately shows up as revenue. At the bottom line, we are budgeting for approximately a $650,000 positive net income. And again, if you remember the process, we take this and it ultimately flows over into a cash flow and capital budget. So I want to touch base on capital budget, but I don't want to spend too much time. We talked about this a little more deep, gave a little bit of a preview last month. There's not a ton of changes, but we have some IT projects, replacing data center servers. Those are kind of just reached their end of life, natural end of life. We're going to look at expanding access control to some areas that don't currently have it. Capital equipment, that number continues to increase as we continue to have to make plans, more long-term plans to buy things like transformers. Additionally, the cost of those goods has been hit hard with inflation over the last 3 years, so that number continues to grow. Voltage conversion projects really is a series of small projects along West Main Street that'll help really target that railroad tracks over to Valley Vista and getting some of that infrastructure that's run right down the road, right down Main Street, taken off and into some alternative fields. We've talked a little bit, we talked quite a bit of undergrounding Little G Drive, which I don't know what else to call it. So if anybody has a better name, but it's a little unnamed road off of G Drive. I think the folks on G Drive call it Little G Drive.
Whatever it's called.
So we're going to call it that. Be like a dock edition. We might be the only people that actually call it that, but we're going to refer to it as Little G Drive.
OG and BG.
Can you go back to the pilot
To the pilot? Yeah,
screen?
pilot.
So that's what
We're looking at transferring $524,000 over to the city.
and the pilot is based on,
Pilot is 4.5% of net sales. So the city earns 4.5% on all sales that aren't their own. They don't earn 4.5% on their own sales.
Okay.
Yeah, and that number is,
well, I'm just,
Yeah.
I mean, it's growing
yes,
substantially, but so I guess I'm looking at the budget and wanting to be very conservative because of this scary political tariffs on power and all this stuff that everybody's throwing out there in the news. And I'm just, if it's and we don't have Campbell anymore, so if all of a sudden the stuff that we have to go out and buy is substantially more and our net profit is much less, and
that goes back to the PCA. So you power supply is going to fluctuate. Yes, you're 100% right, but we capture that revenue over time through the PCA.
Okay.
So as those costs go up, which they're going to, as a utility, we maintain a certain, it's not a profit margin, it's an operating margin, really. It's the money that we get to keep off the service that we provide, that ultimately we have the ability to reinvest back into, or to pay our employees, to invest into our facilities and infrastructure and equipment, build a cash nest egg for, to meet our cash reserve policy, to, you know, reinvest. So we have mechanisms that protect that operating margin. I'd also say that, you know, to Pat's point, you know, there's certain areas where I anticipate us being more impacted and less impacted. And it doesn't always align with the narrative that you see on the news, because we, you know, like the power coming in from, and I learned some from Pat as far as which ISOs are going to be more impacted, but it's also why we have a risk management policy. We're not, it's not uncommon for us to see drastic changes in power supply that are greater than a 25% tariff on a small portion of the power that flows in the MISO or the market. So we mitigate some of these impacts through risk management, but we can't avoid all of them. You're 100% right. And when you look at goods, that's my bigger concern, is what's the cost of material going to do? What are the cost of meters going to do? You know, what are the cost of transformers going to do if steel and aluminum and, you know, everything kind of crossing a border, you know, has an extra price attached to it? That's where I think we'll more likely to see impacts. But as far as that pilot number, that is a number that is mutually agreed upon by the Light and Power Board and City Council per the city charter. So I don't know the history of where we landed at 4.5%, but that number will grow over time. And it does highlight that as our power supply grows, or our power supply cost and cost to procure our power, our revenue has to naturally offset that, and it will result in increases in the pilot that are at a greater rate than the growth of kilowatt hour sales. It's not all kilowatt hour growth, it's revenue growth that's driving some of those increases. Now, kilowatt hour growth is a contributing factor as well, because you all will get in. I mean, you see the charts every month that we are selling overall. We are, you know, selling more kilowatt hours than we were 2 years ago. That's going to be an increase in pilot as well. Moving in, or keep sticking with the capital budget. The one thing that we did this year is you'll notice the equipment replacement fund. We put $300,000 in there, and as we've talked about, you know, the office is currently going through a very lengthy process to evaluate our software provider and alternatives. And I will say, it is clear that we need to be moving software vendors. And when I talk software, it's our enterprise software. So it's our customer information system, our financial information system, our work order system, our payroll, our everything that's unique to the utility. And it's a single enterprise solution, is what they call it. So the way that we look at it is, this is the equipment for the office. This is their bucket truck. This is their digger. This is the equipment they need to do their job. And we've been with our current vendor, Dafron Millsoft, for over 20 years, and they have not grown with us. They're a roadblock to our growth more times than not. Craig can attest to this. He's a time of use customer, and there's challenges that they will not fix as far as that. And that's just a anecdotal type of evidence of why we need to be moving to a partner that will grow with us. But again, I mentioned how long we've been with our current vendor, because we're looking at this as a 20+ year commitment. This is not a 5-year commitment, not a 10-year commitment. This is 25 to 30-year commitment. Hope it's the last software conversion I ever do.
Is that realistic? What I was saying about being agile.
So this, yes, of the vendors we're talking to, absolutely, because they have identified that they need to be as agile as us. One of the vendors, and to be fair, we've only done multi-day demos with one vendor. We have another one coming up in a couple weeks. But little things like we've talked about the ESTA quite a bit. This one vendor has subject matter experts in changing state laws. Because if you think about it, these software vendors are national vendors, and they have to comply with Michigan law. They have to comply with Colorado has a similar law. There's a lot of states have similar but very different laws. And then you have the whole uniquenesses of TVA, and there's just in BPA up in the Northwest. I mean, there's just different factors that play in all over. So as you get in, we're looking for a very robust, agile, progressive type of company that gives us a higher degree of confidence that they will keep pace, that they will continue to invest in their product. But I also don't want to downplay the cost of this. This is not a small expense. When I say it's a bucket truck, a better analogy might be a digger truck. Not quite that much, but I mean, we are planning for ballpark $250,000 expense in a year-long project. So similar to those bucket trucks and these long lead time items, things that you don't want to, if you had to budget that full expense in 1 year, it really limits your ability to reinvest in the system, and it can really change your momentum. So we're wanting to look multiple years out and say, let's start preparing for this. Let's put a little bit of money away this year that puts us a leg ahead next year, just like we do the trucks. So we've got, of that equipment replacement fund, I believe it's 175,000 that we're planning for truck purchases, which would go to the digger truck. That you heard about the demo, and it's been on the topic of conversation. And then $125,000 to this software conversion project. In between now and the final budget, we'll have quite a bit more visibility into what some of our anticipated expenses are. To add a layer there, we're going to have some significant expenses with our current software vendor. They're going to charge us to access our own data, which is, it's really not to access it, to extract it from their system. But we don't want to get quotes from them on that right now. The only reason I think we're getting the level of service that we are from them is because we've raised big enough complaints, and I think they know they're working to try and save us as a customer. If we tip our hat, we may be in for a year of tremendous pain trying to get anything out of them. So we've got some ballpark numbers, but we're thinking probably 30,000 of that is just accessing our data and extracting our data from the current system to move on. Moving on, you got some smaller type projects, facility projects. A big one there is crack sealing the parking lot out here. It's been a few years and needs its attention. So Casey has some projects in the generation facility, largely around some more internal distribution, electric distribution, and working on PLC programming and the controls. The system expansion budget is only Stony Bluff Phase 6 this year. Previous years were kind of bouncing back and forth between Stony Bluff and Harvest Meadows as far as substantial investments in expansion. Harvest Meadows is wrapped up as far as the distribution stuff. It's just services left. And then at the bottom, we always have minor capital projects, and that's kind of I don't want to say a catch-all bucket, but it's a cushion that allows Zach some flexibility as he identifies smaller needs throughout the system. A good example is the power that was rerouted. It's not a project that's ever substantial enough that it warrants its own bucket or its own thing, but it's flexibility that you want to make sure you have inside the year, because if we wouldn't have had that bucket there, we would be talking about doing little projects like rerouting a couple poles instead of 5, 6, 7, 10 poles. We'd have to be looking at 2 and 3 pole projects that ultimately hit the capital budget. So that's what that that $80,000 takes us to a total of 1.1 million. I thoroughly expect this number to move between now and the final budget. We're working on getting quotes. Zach's been working hard on estimates. So, it's a lot of legwork that goes into preparing some of these. Some of the quotes you don't want to get too far out because you find that they get stale, and when you refresh them, there's dynamics that you couldn't plan for. So we get quotes a little close, try to firm up quotes to the final budget, then add some inflationary factors for potential for things to move. But if we can get a 90-day quote for our final budget, we can execute it once the budget's approved and have delivery not until the following fiscal year, or we can actually execute on July 1 and lock in prices at that point, or lock in prices for the final budget. You have questions?
So back when you said digger truck, we have a forestry truck on order, correct?
Yes.
So-
Those funds are there, ready to go.
Okay,
If that came in, it's close. I mean, if that came in, the remaining contributions from this fiscal year would cover that. So we're not necessarily, I mean, granted, the equipment replacement fund is just a moving fund. So it's not necessarily that the money there is allocated, but if you do the first in, first out model, then the money's there.
on this draft, do you need any action from, are you just updating this, or do you need any action tonight
No,
on this?
in the memo, I didn't touch at the memo. The board has to take action today per city charter. Actually, will you go back to the memo? I think it actually references section. But yes, so section 13 and 16.3 of city charter, it requires that Light and Power submit a copy of our upcoming fiscal year's draft budget and capital budget. It's not just, it's operating and capital budgets. That has to go to the city this month. So we have to take action. Ultimately, we'll come back in May with a final budget.
So, any other questions on this, on the budget? Because we got a lot of stuff to get through yet.
A lot of these will be quick moving forward too. Talk about it.
I would entertain a motion.
Motion to move the draft operating and capital budget over to the city.
Support.
Support it.
Go ahead.
Oh, Tina's got this. Tina, I heard her first. Okay.
Somebody stamps.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's been moved and supported. Any further discussion, questions? If not, all those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried.
Been so long since we took action as a board, we almost forgot what to do.
We're almost 3 hours in before there was a vote. I know you guys got the
We got
the
like
agenda and the
8
mo-
right away. It's
Yeah.
like you're.
All right, so we're gonna move quick through some of these. I'm not gonna rehash everything. There's nothing that I wish I could have an answer for you as far as exactly what a program would look like. I know that was something you brought up last month. To be honest, just the timeline was not there. But what I do want to provide in terms of assurances is neither side has seen the deal killer. It's working out, when do funds go from us to from? Does from issue the money and then get reimbursed? Do we front loaded? What do our auditors want to see in terms of internal controls? So it's all things that, and then and we know the guidelines in determining how much flexibility do we want to give from versus how much control do we want to retain. I lean towards giving from quite a bit of flexibility in terms of allowing them, they know their needs better than we do. We have to put some guardrails around the program, obviously. Things like administrative fees. We have to land on it, admin fees. So there are things to be determined. What we spent a lot of time, or not a lot, I'll be honest, not a lot. There's other things monopolizing time over the last month. But what we've done is started to identify what needs to be resolved. What additional inputs do we need? We need inputs from our audit. We need inputs from legal counsel, pieces like that. But ultimately,
But we need to make this decision. This decision has to go to the Michigan Energy So.
Michigan Public, we have to file this with the MPSC by the end of the month.
Okay.
So again, as a reminder, an opt-in or opt-out. We opt in, we are going to charge every customer $1.25 every month. And those funds go to the state to fund the Michigan Energy Assistance Program. If we opt out, we have to have our own local program that is only accessible to our customers, but it is accessible for all home heating needs. That's the big thing. Is consumers will get checks from this. Propane companies, wood companies, pick your poison. If it's home heating, the funds have to be available. But we are confident that a partnership with FROM would be successful.
Okay, I would entertain a motion.
Motion to move forward with this.
I'll support.
So motion to
Opt-in,
opt
sorry.
in or opt out.
To opt out.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Motion to opt out.
And I'll support that motion that way.
Okay, there's motion on the floor. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried.
All right, we'll go on to the ESTA. Again, so this is one I want to spend just a little bit more time because we did not have the opportunity to put this in front of you all before the board meeting. We were going back and forth with the attorney as of this morning, finalizing language. So I don't want to represent, I have a lot of confidence in this policy. Julie and I have spent a lot of time, but as I highlight in the memo, about 30 minutes before the law went into effect and all the policies that you approved last month, contingent on the ESTA going into effect as it was written at the time, policies were passed. They amended the law and it scrapped everything that you guys did last month, which was intentional because if there was going to be changes, we wanted to change our policy to align with any changes. So what I wanted to do, again, when we go through it, the recommendations will stay the same from last month. Three separate recommendations. Approve the non-union PTO policies presented. Approve granting a prorated allocation of ESTA PTO to ensure compliance with FY25. That's a 25-hour Earned Sick Time Act bank given to all non-union full-time employees. Any part-time employees will just start accruing. We've talked about that. And then also the third recommendation will be to authorize me to execute a letter of agreement with the collective bargaining unit to implement materially the same policies and to include the prorated allotment for ESTA compliance in this year.
Each of those had to be an individual vote, or we can vote on all of them. Vote.
I think last month we did it all. You can say, I think it's a pleasure of the board. It's how do you want it? I mean, they're going to be reflected, however you make the motion, they'll be reflected in the minutes that way. So if it's all three, we can spell all three of them.
To do one vote, I would think, Mr. Chairman. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't want to try, I didn't want to write a book and have somebody, we've already done that a few times in the past year, had very, very lengthy motions. So I split it up into three separate action items because they're three separate pieces, but the board can adjust, it can approve it however. I will say only thing I'll talk really about, the new law really changed a lot with payouts, carryover, clarified front loading. These are all things that they changed in order to be more employer accommodating. Recognized that the original ESTA was very employer burdensome. So this is an attempt to ease some of those burdens. It added some complexities to the way that we crafted our policy, just because we were leveraging some grayer areas with front loading. And as they spelled out some of the front loading, there was some collateral damage in the policy that we just needed to clarify. So what I thought I'd do is I included, or Megan has a red line in here. And I just go through any of the changes. The first change is not really a change, but we talked about, it really is this probationary period. We used to be that first year employee accrued their time monthly for a full year. With the change to the law, that became a very manual process and more labor intensive. So we've shrunk that down to just an accrual through that probationary period. And that probationary period is really important because we do leverage it if we need to in order to build an appropriate team. But once they get beyond that probationary period, we need to have confidence that they're going to be a long-term asset, or at least have a higher degree of confidence. So we'll move on from this. And again, sorry, these changes are from the policies last month. So these are not from handbook through both versions. I'm just trying to report on changes month to month instead of going from the ground up. This item G here, again, was, I think that, again, yeah, that one had to get, we've moved because the new law allowed for payouts to be handled a little different. We had to create a whole new section on how to handle payouts. So that dropped down to another section. So that's just kind of moved around. So if you'll keep scrolling, Megan. All right. So with the changes and the clarifications for front loading time, becomes advantageous to have an employee be front-loaded employee. So we're calling them either accrual employees, where they earn 1 hour of ESTA time for every 30 hours worked, or they're a front-load employee where we do exactly that. We front-load their entire time for the rest of the remaining fiscal year. With the changes to the law, it is advantageous to have as many employees front-loaded on July 1. It's also another reason. It's the start of our fiscal year, start of the benefit year. You don't get without getting into details, I'm happy to get into the details, but there are benefits of classifying an employee as a front-loaded employee. There's clarification, or there's some more clarity, but in order to be classified as a front-loaded employee, you have to be a front-loaded employee for the entire benefit year. So if you're an accrual employee through that probationary period, if that probationary period ends July 2nd, hypothetically, July 1st, hypothetically, that employee is an accrual employee all year. And when it just causes mismatches in allowance. I'm happy to get into the details. We're not locked into any of this. This is a board policy. If we get into it 6 months down the road, we have the flexibility of changing this. But this line here gives management essentially the right to convert an employee before their probationary period. And that's in order to leverage some of those benefits and to eliminate some of the ambiguity. While the new law provides more clarity on accrual employee, it provides more clarity on a front load employee. It provides no clarity about transitioning from an accrual to a front load employee inside of a fiscal year. So again, it really does. This is just a tool that we can use to somebody's in the latter half of their probationary period. We've had a chance to work with them. We understand, how they fit in, the dynamics, their skill sets, their growth potential, all that. And we see a great employee. We have 2 probationary employees right now that are both, I'd be comfortable right now saying they're long-term employees from our perspective. They have the right to leave, obviously, but this section does resolve that, or gives us some of that flexibility. We'll go on to the next item, Megan. This one is just clarifications based on the law. It's just there's a lot of focus on notice periods. Go ahead, Megan. This one just simply states that protections of the Sick Time Act don't apply once the ESTA compliant PTO has been exhausted. Just a slight modification there. And then the PTO, the trade-ins and carryover. And this is where, little context, currently, so pre-ESTA, employees had the ability to carry over 80 hours of PTO from one fiscal year to the next. They also had the ability in December or June to cash in or get paid out for up to 40 hours. We need both banks to work together. And there are certain limitations. While the ESTA 2.0 provided clarifications on carryover and cash outs and made them permissible by law, we just needed to codify it. So the first part essentially says they can trade in 40 all-purpose hours in December or at the end of the fiscal year. They can only cash in per law 40 hours of ESTA compliant PTO at the end of the fiscal year. You cannot cash out any ESTA PTO mid-year. It can only be at the end of the fiscal year. In no case may an employee trade in more than 40 hours total between the two banks. So the two banks combine to get back to right where everybody is now with the ability to cash out 40 hours. There's some nuances on which banks you can pull from and when, but ultimately our employees will have the flexibility and the ability to cash in up to 40 hours of PTO. Without going through all the details, it's the same pretty much setup for carryover between the two banks. You can carry over between the two banks combined, you can carry over up to 80 hours. There's some language in here. It's kind of, it's policy language, and there's some reason behind that. But again, the big changes between ESTA 1.0 and 2.0 were around front loading, cash outs, carryovers, things like of that nature.
Okay, so I don't want any of our employees to get caught with their pants down and forget who's going to say, hey, you're going to come up, you're going to be forfeiting about 5 hours. Is somebody going to be able to do that for your employees?
Nothing changed. The way that we've tried to structure this is nothing, how we go about things don't change. So yeah, that's right now with one bank. PTO is being monitored and each manager gets touch points of their employees and what their bank looks like periodically. And there's definitely touch points throughout the year to the same effect.
I just don't want that to happen because even though that Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan is a huge entity, that's happened. And that's where it's insane that these people, well, I thought it was this time of the month or whatever that I was supposed to do it in July or May or whatever to cash it in or take it. So I just want to throw out there my concerns is I want to make sure that there's somebody that's looking out for our employees that will flag it to them. I know we're all adults, but we all get busy. We want to do a good job at work. And then that's in the back of your mind that, oh, great, I just forfeited. I don't care if it's 1 hour. You know what I'm saying? That I want that to be brought to the forefront.
And that happens right now and it'll continue.
Okay, absolutely. Thank you.
Absolutely. No change because of the ESTA. We will continue to do exactly that.
Okay.
And we also monitor the other way. We have meetings with employees that don't manage their time well and burn too much of it. And we try and make sure that they're aware of the situation that they're creating for themselves, just the same as if, you're not taking any time. If you're not taking any time, I want to encourage you to take time. It's one of the things that I think this utility does very well is promote a healthy work-life balance. So we will continue to do that.
Well, sometimes people do use that. Like you have the opportunity to do the 40 hours and cash it in. I do know people, even though they needed that money. That's kind of like a bonus, that 40, even though that as an employer, you want them to take time away so that you can relax and what have you. But there are people out there that look at that as like an extra bonus that they didn't take it. And so they get to have that. Okay.
Anything else?
So that is
Thank you.
the extent of the changes. I'm happy to send out this red line to everybody.
Does anybody have any questions? What I would do is we will make one vote. And if you, Megan, if you would, in the notes, or the minutes, if you would include the red line, what we're voting on in there so that it's
In the minutes.
Well, so.
We don't typically, we don't put copies of policies in the minutes, but what we will do is the actual board packet, the board packet you're seeing here that has everything will be captured for our records.
Okay.
So this is the official board packet and will be reflected.
Okay, I just want,
Yes, no,
I just
I get
wondered
what you're
because
getting.
it's not in,
Yes,
it's not in our minutes or in our
in your
packet
packet.
here. So I just want to make sure when we make that vote, that
Yes,
this is, that someplace,
yes.
the vote and what we voted on
Match up,
match up.
fair request. So we will make sure, we will make sure of that for sure.
So you're elected, Daniel.
I knew that was
I
coming.
know it's coming.
Come on, Mr. Woodsmith. All right, before we take a vote or we move on, I do want to draw your attention to the first item I should have, but if you'll go down one page, Megan, sorry. Beginning with the start of the first fiscal year of employment after the completion of the probationary period. The item that I added was a modification to the probationary period. So just keep that reference in mind as we go to the next action item, but it's related to this. So just want to provide future context for 3 minutes down the road.
And it's pretty
I
simple.
know. I was trying to give him a little time to think about exactly how to.
All you gotta do is just
Yeah, kinda.
say what's in there, because it's gonna show up in the minutes.
Sure. I motion to approve the non-union PTO policies presented. In addition, approve the granting of a prorated allocation of an ESTA PTO bank to ensure compliance, fiscal year 2025. Also, in addition, to authorize the GM to execute a letter of agreement with the collective bargaining unit to implement PTO policies that materially align with the non-union policies and that includes a prorated allotment of the ESTA PTO for fiscal year 25 compliance purposes as adjusted for the new updated ESTA
Yes.
policy regulation.
Yeah.
Do we have a motion? Do we have support?
I'll support it.
Okay,
You support it long?
Can we do the long form?
Repeat the whole.
I need the long form of the support for the record.
okay. Been moved and supported. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried.
Yes, so this is the item that's added, so it's and again, I apologize for the last minute additions. We had 30 days post the ESTA 2.0 to get everything in place. And so we're operating on a pretty tight timeline, and our legal counsel is dealing, yeah, they did, and I want to commend our legal counsel. We use a group, I don't know all their names, Fahey Schultz, Dickinson Wright is our general counsel, Fahey Schultz, Lizzie and Chad, they're our labor attorneys. They do all of our union negotiation work, and they have been fantastic to work with through this. But again, I talked about that probationary period. The only adjustment that we're recommending is adding the word working between 90 and days. So an employee should consider his or her orientation period as the first 90 working days from the date of employment. And what that does is it aligns with the union contract, and it becomes a more important need as we look at tying PTO accrual to just that. We want to make sure that we have as much opportunity to identify a strong candidate in that orientation period. Gives us, again, the lines with the union contract, but it also is a little bit more heightenedly important when there are other benefits tied to that. And if we front load something coming out of 90 calendar days, but they haven't had a tremendous opportunity to work part-time, whatever, part-time's a bad example, because they don't get front loaded. But we just want to make sure that we have all the opportunity we need, especially when coming out of your probationary period. There's going to be a liability that's attached to every new employee with their ability to be paid out for any unused PTO in the event that they choose to leave and provide the appropriate notice. So the only change in the recommendation that we're making is in the non-union employee handbook to adjust the orientation period from the first 90 days to the first 90 working days.
I will motion to adjust the orientation period from the first 90 days to the first 90 working days for non-union employees.
I'll support.
Okay, it's been moved and supported. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried.
So we'll do this one fairly quickly. Even in my, I don't, after a, we've been here 3 hours. I don't think wordsmithing is a good use of anybody's time at this point. But when we talked last month about strategic planning update, it was identified that our need to be agile. It's why I liked when Pat used that term. It played into this pretty nicely.
What we talked about.
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly. So I'm not going to reiterate, but I did. I drafted this. It says low light and power will remain agile and adaptive to external factors such as legislative changes, supply chain disruptions, and evolving energy landscape to ensure the continued delivery of safe, reliable, cost-effective electricity. By proactively monitoring and responding to these influences, we will sustain operational excellence and support long-term customer satisfaction.
And that strategic priority would be labeled as the others are listed. This would be agility.
Yeah, I didn't do a great job of following the same format. So I'd have to think about what bucket to put that under. I guess it's more an external. I think it'd be adaptive and agile.
It stands by itself.
Yeah.
There's safety, reliability, community, and customers' financial health. I mean, it kind of, I guess, is under there.
It's under a lot. I think it can be, agile and adaptive. I can land on something there. And I can come up with a 1 or 2 word title, hopefully. I hope. But again, the strategic plan is really the board's document, so we're working on it and trying to provide content based on feedback and recommendations that we bring, but ultimately this is the board's document basically. So a couple of things we can either take action, as I mentioned, you all can take action tonight, or people can provide feedback between now and April. There's nothing that has to be done this month. It was just a matter of bringing it back this month as, to keep a sequential or meeting cadence, but there's nothing stopping us if the board wants to, make some other considerations or wordsmith some more and provide me some feedback between now and April. Happy to bring it back then.
I was okay with it.
It's to be honest, it's non-committal. It's a framework.
More of does it read
I like it.
a consensus, or do you want to?
I think it's important for the strategic plan to be on and adopted by the board, because it's really a document intended to transcend any individuals and be that guiding document regardless of the individual. So when there's board action behind it, it just carries a little more weight. So again, no obligation to vote this month either.
Do we want to just do it?
So I guess my question is, are we taking this strategic priorities and taking all the bullet points out and just replacing it with that?
No,
I think
it's in addition, it's adding. An additional strategic priority was identified last month. So it would be additional.
So it's another bullet point.
Yeah.
That's gonna go underneath the strategic priorities.
That's correct.
Who's making the motion?
I'll make a motion that we add a strategic priority of agility and adaptiveness to our strategic priorities
Supported as presented. Substantially as presented, in case we miss a comma or something.
Materially.
Okay, it's been moved and supported. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
I,
Opposed, motion carried.
I think it's also something like next year, if we have some crossover, then that's something we could fix it then, where we say, hey, let's clean it up a little bit. But
That really, again, it's the intention of the strategic plan is on an annual basis. I think it's important for staff to report back to the board to say, you know, what are we doing and how does it fit underneath the strategic priorities? And
Well, but I think it's also good for us as a board at some point to sit down and kind of self-evaluate it ourselves and make sure that we're sticking to it. And
I think that's fair. Yeah. All right, so another action item F, G, whatever letter it is at this point, Stony Bluff easement. Again, I think the board, if the board's not familiar with Stony Bluff, come talk to me. We've been dealing with it for a long time, but you know, the fact that somebody else serves phases 1 and 2, when we get to phase 6, we don't have any infrastructure directly adjacent, so we can jog through a little green space to hop over. Once the rest of the neighborhood is filled in or is developed, we'll be able to loop feed a section, or not really a loop. I mean, it'll be an open point in there, but it'll just provide another redundant feed along the way. Kind of an oddball situation, but it's basically what's necessary to serve phase 6. And they're gracious enough to give us the easement.
Are these easements written up through a lawyer or?
Yes, I'm sorry. I thought I put that. Honestly, I'm not sure. I thought I put that in there, but yes, this is our general counsel modified our lab. So obviously the board's aware of the Oklahoma property and all the easement issues that ultimately came out of that. But the easement, language was really scrutinized coming out of that. So we had a good framework for the last easement we did with Stony Bluff. This is just some minor adjustments.
isn't this in Lowell Township and not city of Lowell though?
But
Or is this
It
in
is
like a
in
425 thing or?
But yes, the agreement is between Stony Bluff LLC and the city of Lowell. Are you talking right up here? Yeah. Who the agreement is with?
So us, well, we are part of it.
So the other piece of this, and I should,
City council.
yes, city, because we can't own real property.
Oh, gotcha. Okay,
Rights to real property go through city council as well. So yes, it's kind of a unique situation because this is not in the city, but ultimately the city council has to accept the easement.
Because it is property.
Because, yeah, so the way that the process will work, and I should have paused there, is based on our legal counsel's recommendation. She recommends that the Lowell Light and Power Board formally accept the easement and make a recommendation for city council to accept the easement. And again, it should be a formality with the city. There's no, you look at risk reward. There's no risk on, you don't have to, Jim. But you remember that pilot number? It doesn't get any bigger if we don't serve new customers. No, but it really is. I mean, to that point, I'd make a joke, but it's really no risk, and it's our avenue to serve more customers.
CYA is down the road.
Well, yes, that's the big thing that came out of that is, and the way we look at easements in general is if we can go rectify a problem, if it's a tiny little piddly line and it serves one customer, well, if they don't want it there, we'll just remove stuff. But when you look at situations like this where you have to install, you have significant investments in underground infrastructure, CYA is a good tactic.
Entertain a motion to accept this easement and to send it on to City Hall.
With a recommendation for them to accept it.
I will move to accept the easement for from Stony Bluff and to recommend that the city council also accept the easement, please.
Please.
And I'll support.
Okay, it's been moved and supported. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, motion carried. Next, general manager employment agreement amendment. I've,
Megan, that's not in there. I'm sorry. Everybody should have sent out an email with content from Perry and I. No. I won't read this right now, but I just got an email from our attorney. We may have, they may have uncovered some things in ESTA, so we may not be. And what I do want to do it again. Yeah, and I hate to do that, but I do, while we're in between items.
Meeting adjourned at 9:10 p.m.
I did want to highlight that the timeline between 1.0 and 2.0, we spent years, I mean, really almost a year. When it became imminent, we spent a good 5-6 months preparing for ESTA 1.0. I cannot come to you and say there will be no policy changes because of things of unintended consequences or anything like that. We just did not have the luxury of time to uncover every leaf, uncover every stone. So just so happens that at 9 o'clock, our attorneys emailed me saying, and all I saw was we uncovered something. I said, you know what? We'll review it, and if there's adjustments, we'll bring them back. But I don't want to create the perception that we are confident we nailed 100%. The framework is there, and the intention has not changed. Protect the employees, make sure that it's not a loss of abilities or benefits or anything. So if there's more, we'll continue to approach it with that same mindset, and we will bring anything back to the board. But I don't want to represent to the board that we're not going to continue to talk about the ESTA at this point. So just a footnote.
So you're admitting that you can't be perfect.
No, I cannot be perfect. Let me see if.
That's a tough situation.
Yeah, it's a doozy. What do you want me to bring up? I can point to Megan here. Everybody has it on their tablets, but I'm happy to have Megan drum this up and.
well, I mean, I'm,
Or I can.
we're basic, so here's the deal. I mean, we're basically amending it. Talking with not only Charlie, and this is not something that Charlie's been pushing hard, but it's probably, I'm pushing it harder because of the atmosphere. Might not have anything directly to do with it, but the public atmosphere, that's political atmosphere that's going on. As a board, we are appointed by the city council. This board could change at any moment. That they could remove one of us, all of us, whatever the case may be. So it's not changing, the contract is not changing the amount of what we're paying. Charlie, it's basically the biggest thing that looking to change is instead of a yearly contract, is having it set up as a 3-year contract. We will still be doing reviews yearly. We will still be determining benefits, pay, everything yearly. But again, what it's doing is, and I've had from other employees and say, it's making the company as a whole more, I'm stretching for the word, not necessarily reliable, but other employees of, huh?
Stable.
Stable. Other employees look at, the general manager of Lowell Light and Power. They're, making a long-term commitment to Lowell Light and Power because of the general manager. And all of a sudden, if the general manager is, year by year, they're not knowing, it puts a doubt in their mind. Geez, do I want to be looking for, do I want to look at all my options because I don't know. And it's not the trust thing, it's, because we do have a great board, but I'm gonna just say that this board could change at any moment. And what the lawyers have done and looked at is basically having a 3-year contract and moving it so it basically continues to be a 3-year contract. It can be each year we can vote to change that. We can, for cause, we can fire the general manager. It's not changing that, but it's just giving more stability. So what happens is having a 3-year contract, then you go through the first year, and what you're doing is you're adding another year. As long as in agreement, you're adding another year to the end of the contract. As a year goes off, a year comes back on the back end. So it's always basically a 3-year contract, and it sets more stability for whoever the general manager is. Again, we are not, as a board, we're not elected. We are appointed. And the council can change from year to year, and it's just giving more stability. And it's not changing.
That's kind of the only change that hasn't really already been approved.
Correct.
The other updates are compensation that we've already approved, Charlie's raises, so car allowance, and I can't remember, it was April, so it's been a while. We talked about changing the severance from 6 months to a year, which is needed to help protect Charlie, because you think about like a GM.
And
he loses a job here. He can't, he has to move his whole family. I mean, his whole family to come here. So like you know,
the history. I mean, it was.
Agreed on all that. So
it was 6 months some time ago, but again, I don't know who was on. But when we had I don't think Jim was even on, but we had a council that was firing city managers and right in the middle of a meeting and different things. And when Greg Pierce was here, as a board, we changed. He was going to retire, but he was going to retire in 6 months, whatever. And we actually changed his severance to a year at that moment to try to put some safeguards on from the council at the time, even though that the council does not have any jurisdiction over the general manager of Lowell Light and Power. The only jurisdiction they have is a complete separate board of Lowell Light and Power, but they do have the opportunity. They could remove members and appoint new members. And I'm looking at this, like Daniel just said, it's, in all fairness, it's, for me, it's the climate that we're in right now. I know we hope that it never gets down to this level, but the instability and, because this is a government job, position. It's little old Lowell, but it's just looking at, we need to make Lowell Light Power is a great company, and we need to ensure that we do things to keep it a great company and a great place to work. And so basically the only, in this, correct me if I'm wrong, that's basically the only,
Yeah, and
I mean, the contract has written the other things into it. But those that are, like Daniel said, those are things we already voted on. It's just keeping it basically a 3-year contract. And as long as we don't make any changes, we could, after a year, we could say, no, it's not working, we want to change it, or we want to, whatever the case may be. But in this contract that's written, it basically be 3 years. Once a year goes off, you backload the next year. So it continues to be a 3-year contract. And it's not only, in my view, it's not only for the general manager. That's who we hire, is the general manager. But it gives the rest of the employees at Lowell Light and Power some confidence that, that general manager, which I believe we have a great general manager and we want to keep him. But I think it's something that should be needed, even if Charlie wasn't here, and if we weren't here. It just sets the company up in a more stable, Andrew's terminology, a more stable situation.
Here, we have set the precedent, so. But don't.
so, and so to just a little more perspective from my side, the current contract is indefinite. That's a very, I mean, what's that? I mean, yeah, at any given point, the board can terminate me and it's just a severance package. And a lot of structures are a fixed term. The problem you run is what happens the day that term expires. If there's a board that's overturned, or if there's there's turnover on the board, and this has happened in Michigan within the last year. Somebody was just told your contract's going to expire. You get no protections from your contract. Essentially, it was a termination at the end of the contract. So that's obviously a big departure from where we're at. And what this structure allows for is, I guess I'll ask a question, and it's irrelevant to this conversation, but do you identify 3 pay increases? So what this does, in my opinion, and I'm trying to be objective, it's hard, I'm obviously impacted by this, but if you go with a 3-5 fixed term contract, there are fixed increases associated with each annual. So what value does the annual review process have at that point? Your compensation, you've got a carrot and a stick. The carrot wins a lot, but to predetermine what pay raises are going to be handcuffs the board a little bit. And this structure allows the board flexibility throughout. If the general manager, and I hope that as Perry and I worked on this, we identified a framework that works regardless of who's in the seat. And that's the intention. But it gives the board the opportunity to have a meaningful review every year and make meaningful adjustments, good or bad, on an annual basis. It's more reflective of their performance at that time instead of evaluating performance on a 3-year basis, because ultimately performance leads to compensation. So when compensation is determined 3 years in advance, I believe this structure allows the board far more flexibility to make adjustments and to identify problems in the interim and allow for adjustment, because turnover at any position is expensive. Turnover at the head of the table is more expensive at that point. So it allows for the board to make an investment in the person, and it be meaningful throughout the contract. So that's the intention, is the framework is intended to be a good balance for the board, for me, and hopefully a framework that would continue on beyond, well into the future. At some point, we're all going to leave, but the intention is to create a framework that 20 years down the road, nobody's looking at us going, what the heck were you idiots doing?
Well, you could also set up incentives during that time frame.
Yes.
To help advance your
Yes,
finance, whatever you want to call it. We did not do that at this point, but something we did talk about.
and I would say every board and all their employees, each one is different and each one has different needs. So not saying that the way they did it is wrong or right. This is just what Perry and I thought, we mutually agreed to, and looped some other board members in throughout the process as Perry and I have worked through this.
So what do you?
Any questions?
No.
So I would we just need to
Approve the employment agreement amendment.
I would say, yeah, I'll make a motion to make an employment agreement amendment for our general manager per the memorandum, section 3, to change the terms to a 3-year agreement that's automatically extended by 1 year annually unless either party provides written notice.
Sorry,
Or we have to accept all 4 of those.
you need to accept, in the email that I sent, there was an amendment. So we need to accept the amendment.
Oh, okay,
The
accept.
amendment, this is just a summary of what's in the amendment.
Gotcha,
But-
gotcha. Okay.
In the
The whole
email I
amendment.
sent, I believe it did, I hope it did, I've sent a lot of emails, should have had the actual contract amendment language.
Yes.
Okay, so then I'll make a motion to approve the contract amendment
as written.
as written.
Support.
It's been moved and supported. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
I,
Opposed, motion carried. On to informational items.
We could do this a different way too. Who has questions?
I do.
We have been here for 3.5 hours. I'd hate to spend the next 20 minutes talking about things you don't care. But I don't also want to skip over or eliminate the opportunity to ask questions. So
So the only questions I have is, and it comes from doing the or no, whatever.
know before.
Because it constantly talks about IT policy, blah, and everything. Do we have an actual written policy?
We are in the process of developing that in partnership with, so we're using what's called the NIST framework, which it's the National Institute for Standards and Technology. I kind of going to talk real slow and hope that somebody fill in the gaps if need be. But it's a framework. It's like, it originally was a framework developed by the Department of Defense, which is why you know that. But it is a framework that was created by the Department of Defense for contractors, for people like GE, who supply the government with the contracts or with goods. So that's our framework. It's a lengthy process. It's probably a year. We're over a year into it already. Casey, Megan, and I are walking.
I keep going through this, and doing it and going, well, I've never seen a policy. I guess I'm just shooting from the.
Oh, that's one of the gaps. And we're in a lot of the policies are very technical and are completely irrelevant to everybody here. It's encryption standards for third parties. I mean, there's some really technical aspects of the cybersecurity policy.
The other question, because I just was wondering, because talking about possibility, new software, different things. Did we ever implement our inventory software here in the office or here in the warehouse with the wand and all that kind of stuff? So, I mean,
We actually, it was getting ready to be, we were gearing up for it and decided that let's pull back because you're trying to fit a square peg in a round hole, which you're highlighting why one of the many reasons we've identified the need to identify a new vendor. They routinely leverage external software that does not fully integrate with their software. So you constantly have to make adjustments or make modifications, and we just never could quite get that integration where it needed to be. And then once we identified the strategic objective of transitioning software providers, we put any investment into our current software pretty much on hold at this point. It's going to be it'd be a pretty lengthy process to get stood up, and hopefully in 2 years we're sitting with a vendor that has a much more integrated solution. So the short answer is no. Long answer is.
but that would be part of the new software. I mean, I guess I'm just, so we occasionally make decisions that we thought at the time were great decisions, but then found out later that maybe financially they weren't the best decisions, like the generator, you know. that
Oh, you're
we
going the
got
other
from
direction.
Texas.
Yeah.
Well, we had a.
Yeah,
big
the
one,
diesel.
you know, and the inventory software, and I mean, occasionally, you know, and I'm just
Yeah, there are
learn from our mistakes, I guess.
there are absolutely, and I've actually talked to Steve, not directly, it sounds accusatory, but but we talked and he said, look, there were a lot of things, a lot of balls that needed to advance down the court. And as a board, as a utility, we owe a lot to Steve that he got a lot of those balls moving and advanced us in what was appropriate at the time, or appeared to be appropriate at the time. As we've dug into some other items, as we've had the opportunity and the luxury of time, we have altered some of those decisions, but I don't want it to come off as they were the wrong decisions. They were just the right decisions at the time based on the information we had, but the circumstances have changed, and yeah.
And then I have one more question. And this is for Zach. Because I know he's going to stand on his report.
Yeah, ask any question, because I wasn't planning on stopping at any of the reports.
So how are we addressing, like, is it just when we find out, or are we, because it seems like we should be taking a proactive approach to home car chargers, because again, here is number 4, Grand River transformer change out. Each day we receive an email about our top overload transformers. Recently, there was a transformer that showed significant overloading. After checking, we found the homeowner had installed an electric charger, which explained that a larger transformer was needed. And I guess, I mean, great that they found that out and everything, but as a company, should we be proactive in communicating to our customers, say, hey, if you're adding a bunch of load to your house and everything, you need to let us know, you need to, or isn't it really that important?
We, you know, it's a double-edged sword. I don't have a definitive answer. Yes, we can do more, but I would call this proactive. Reactive is waiting, and this is partially reactive. But reactive is really waiting till the transform, it's not monitoring loading and waiting till there's a symptom that indicates that there's an overloading, not a data point.
Okay.
This to me, it's a newer item, but there are opportunities to promote, to really market and reach out to our customers and say, hey, we need to know. But we are becoming increasingly disconnected with our customers. As our changing demographic, there's a very definitive demographic that walks into our office. There's a very definitive demographic that doesn't engage with us. And it's not, the customers that walk in tend to be older customers that it's just the way they do business, but that's one piece of it and that's just part of it. The other piece that's replacing that is a group of customers that they're transient, they're moving into the area, that don't have a long-term connection to Lowell. They live in the neighborhood with me, honestly. I mean, it's my story. If I didn't work here, love to think that I care about my electric utility so much that I know that they're public power. If they're as good as we are, I would. To be fair, I would know all about them. But I've got some really good friends that I had over. It's just anecdotal, but we had over to the house Saturday. And I asked them, I said, have either of you ever been to our office? And friend goes, you guys have an office? You can go in there? It's just not a thought. So they're not engaging with the utility the same way. So in order for marketing to be effective, we have to develop marketing streams and ways of communicating with our customers. So we continue to send price signals for one. Pat talked about price signals. Price signals with time of use electric rates. It's advantageous to charge overnight. We're also sending price signals with leveraging our aid construction policy in order to provide a rebate for a level 2 charger. In order to get that level 2 charger, in order to get the level 2 charger rebate, you have to go on the time of use rate. So kind of a proactive efforts were the first step was to develop a rate structure that sent the price signals to customers that there's a benefit for them to let us know. But simultaneously, we're developing communications. Why we're investing more time and effort in Facebook. It's not because we want to surf the web. It's that we've, through experience, found that when there's a major outage, when things happen, customers go to Facebook to look for information. So if we can develop these communication channels with our customers, we can push this more appropriately. But trying to find ways to reach our customers is getting increasingly challenging, and it's something we talk about fairly regularly, just with the changing demographics of our area.
I guess my thought was that always require an upgrade when somebody puts in a car charger, or only does this happen to be a particularly small circuit? And
I'll ask you. Zach doesn't hear so great.
He was sleeping.
So does it always require a transformer upgrade if someone's going to put in a car charger in their house, or is it just because this person happened to be on a smaller circuit? Or
I would say it's a situation. If the transformer was oversized to begin with, or if this one, like you said, is a single house and it went from 100% of its load to 218% of its load.
So it was a single house transformer that was already near its limit. And
Well, so transformers are allowed to be at like 100 kc with no more 150% of torque.
right, yeah,
Yeah.
I remember the presentation a couple of years ago about your transformer plan. But I guess because I know this started with, Perry had mentioned, should we ask people to say, if you're installing this, talk to us because we have to change something. But what I didn't know is, well, is this a unique case, or is it, half the time somebody puts in a car charger, they'll have to change the transformer.
Maybe half.
But then that got me wondering, well, if you upgrade your furnace, or if you put in
The big thing is there are certain pieces, like if you were to go to a heat pump from natural gas, that can significantly, but these level 2 car chargers are 15 kW by themselves. A single, we hang a, yes.
Yeah.
And so a lot of it depends on the more services that are fed off of that transformer, the more diversification of load that you get. So it's more likely, it's not guaranteed, but it's more likely that you will have available capacity when there's 10 services coming off of a transformer versus one, where it's easier to size a single house. You know that, hey, you can hang a 10, you can hang a 10 kVA transformer. It's going to feed most houses in our service territory. But a 10 by itself is not enough to serve even a level 2 charger. So you naturally just find yourself behind the 8 ball when somebody on a single transformer does. Now, if you go up into Stony Bluff or you go into Harvest Meadows and there's 10 services off of a transformer, that transformer is a much larger transformer to start with, and there's probably untapped capacity, which is why the price signals were the first piece in trying to maximize the time, because it really is, it's time based. We don't build our system to meet 75% of our load. We build our system to meet the people 1 hour a year. So for the 8,759 other hours of the year, there's other capacity in that transformer. And you tend to find more capacity the more services you have hooked up to that transformer. But it really is a case by case analysis that the two of the guys down there have to put their heads together sometimes and identify what's appropriate.
So in terms of like the whole layers of safety, for lack of a better term, not saying this is a safety issue per se, but I mean, I like Perry's idea of just, hey, we can just get the word out once in a while, even just a random thing on the webpage or Facebook, or just say, if you're making a big electrical change, let us know. Tell me it's not a big deal, but it'll help us, right?
I mean,
You'll get a few people that'll do that, and it'll be nice to say, hey, let's plan for this, rather than Zach going to Casey and saying, ooh, what is this? And it just saves a little bit of work, but we already have it covered because we're already watching all the data anyway. And if something happens, we're going to go out there and take care of it before it becomes a real problem. It's one of those things.
We're gonna hope.
Yeah.
so, yeah, I mean, I would
It's not guaranteed.
in the
Right.
email of each bill, there's
think-
an opportunity to do that, or even on each
Yeah.
paper bill that gets sent out. You can put a line, adding a charger or solar, let us know, kind of there.
I think they're good at figuring out that
Yeah.
kind of thing. It's just, if it would help us to know sometimes, it would just make their job easier. And we'll try, but we're not going to, like you said, we're never going to get everyone to do that. Some people will never even be aware that they've got a Facebook page or something.
And I'll say part of it is a value driven,
Yep.
time, obviously competing priorities. Not to say this isn't, because it definitely is, because it's one of the biggest risks we have in terms of overloading equipment. But the fact that we have some protections, yes, I don't disagree. It's been a target of, we want to market this. We want to have some of the other pieces in place so that we had tools. If somebody said, hey, yeah, I do, what's in it for me? Well, there's this charger rebate, there's this time of use rate, there's things, and that's where, Zach, even, they're talking about, hey, you got an EV, you need to talk to the office about time of use rates. The other piece of this, and you talk about value, is most EV drivers are more engaged with their utility. So we get a lot of proactive phone calls already. I will not even claim that it's the majority. So it does make it tough to discern how much value is in it. If you're targeting 10 people, there's 10 unknown EVs out there. How much effort has to go in? And what's the likelihood that if we don't reach one of them, it results in an overloaded transformer that we don't catch? But I'll say, you're all 100% right. There's more marketing, there's more outreach that can be done. And it's on our roadmap, and it's something that it's also a matter of timing. If you hit a critical mass of customers buying EVs and you catch it right, ideal timing is the month before everybody decides to buy an EV. So it's top of mind. And if we sense it, but it also highlights the need to periodically do it. So there's a lot of variables, but yes, point taken and well received.
I lied. I got one more, and then I'll shut up. Customer survey. I'm torn. And because I don't know with the APPA, what it was costing us. And
Less than $1,000, it's cheap.
so part of it is, We've won the top award 2 years in a row. So is it, is it a waste of our time to go for, 3 years in a row or whatever? But at the same time, because I like the idea of creating our own survey that can maybe be able to grab more information that is more useful to us. But on the flip side, I hate the idea of, oh, Lowell was on there 2 years in a row. What'd they screw up? They're not on there this year. And that's not to say that we would be on there
I'm
2 years in a row.
confident we would.
Well, I am too, but I'm just giving you how I feel about it.
No, and that's, that mirrors our internal conversations as well, is, on one hand, you run the risk of, and what we noticed in year 2, there were fewer respondents than there were in year 1. And I'm afraid that if that trend continues into this year, and then we invest in a more robust survey and the trend continues again, at what point does that survey fatigue? So again, this is very much a strategy driven. It's not like if I come in here with a power supply recommendation, it's been vetted, it's been analyzed by MPPA and us, and it's a definitive recommendation. This is one that, we want feedback. I will say, and this is just my personality, and my personality definitely influences, has an influence on the utility. I struggle to apply. I struggle to do things to win awards without additional value behind it. And I feel like, and that's not to say I'm right, you're wrong, or you're right, I'm wrong. It's just my personality. I struggle with the idea of doing things for the simple fact of getting an award. And I feel like if we're not gaining new information from it, is that all we're doing? If the board wants to continue, because it's a value to the board to be able to say we're 3 years in a row, or 4 years, or 5 years, or however many years in a row, I'm 100% supportive of that. But it would, I would be seeking board guidance on that, shaping our path forward. But yeah, I think we have time. I can put it on an agenda as an action item, and we can take some time to have a dedicated conversation to, and staff can provide some more details on number of respondents, what those trends were. So by no means are we trying to dictate anything. It's simply, hey, this is our thoughts at this point. Trying to keep the board, in the loop, because this is something that I know is important to the board. So
I like what you said about the awards that don't do it for its own sake, because it's no fun to be ashamed to get an award, right? If you feel like you didn't earn it, but you got it. That's happened to me in the past, and it's just, not a big thing, but I mean, it's like, why am I getting an award for doing your job or something like that? It's like this. And so I'd like us to we're going to get something. It's like, hey, we wanted this, we got it, we earned it, we're good about it.
I will say, it's earned. It's a reflection, and
But if it wasn't, as you mentioned, if it wasn't something that's going to be meaningful to us, like we weren't going to use the data, we felt we didn't need it, I wouldn't want them to say, oh, look, we got another award, but we don't use that data, And I think that's all I wanted to say. I kind of like that approach of making sure we kind of believe what we're doing, and we're chasing the right things.
I think if you give individual work. Charging yourself.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And really, what's driving a lot of it is the fear that a survey this year could be detrimental to a more meaningful survey the following year. Because Jim, completely agree that any recognition on the utility, it's not about, especially customer satisfaction, because it touches on reliability. It touches on every aspect of the business, and it's a reflection of the cohesiveness of the team, not any one individual or even a small group of individuals. It's truly the sum is greater than That's whatever that saying is. We're better as a team than as the sum of individuals.
Gone to places where they got 20 through 22 and all of a sudden 23 is gone. Yeah, what happened 23? You guys, new manager, what happened?
So I will say too, for the board, I can't say anything on camera publicly. We'll be replacing the board with something different.
That's a teaser. That's a teaser.
So we will not be going, as a utility, we will not be going unrecognized.
Yay.
Any other questions? Okay, Daniel, board comment.
If we get through all the,
Unless you got a question, we're moving on.
Shortened meeting. That's the only one.
Yes, good call. Thank you. So I did want to bring attention to the fact that come April, our next board meeting, somebody that's currently sitting at the table will most likely not be sitting at the table. That person is also integral to the development of, or the compiling of the board packet. We also have another individual in the office that is going to be coming off of a more extended absence. So we wanted to talk about the possibility of paring down specifically the performance, or not the performance, the informational items next month. And either reporting on them again in May, or once we have the opportunity to compile all the data, send them out as a separate post board meeting type of attachment or
Is that
something.
kind of like postpartum,
Postpartum.
postpartum?
Part of the informational items.
Postpartum.
All good names.
Any
Sounds good to
issues?
me.
All right.
Sounds good to
So
me.
next month's board packet will be pared down.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for bringing that up. That is,
Exclamation point.
and that is
that's a
monumental.
big one, yeah.
That is
Right.
monumental. It's one of those things in our time. You mark and go, that's a good accomplishment.
Yeah.
That energizes the beginning of the meeting.
So he wasn't gonna stand up.
Board comment, just want to say thanks everybody for a long meeting. Thank you for the budgeting work, the ESTA work, and all those things, because the crunch on those sometimes is, it's a lot. And yeah, exciting news about the redundant feed.
Andrew,
So I've got a few notes, so I'll try to get through them quick, because I'd like to see us finish by 10, but, so we talked about with Pat, when he's here, we talked about, shifting roles, and I guess that's just something, maybe more directed at the board, and Charlie is, keep in mind, what are the new opportunities that come with shifting roles in this environment? And that, even just one example that came to mind was just, I remember Ryan, we kind of went from a company that trimmed trees to a company that worked with people to understand why we're trimming their trees and what we could do. And instead, as a result, people became happy and supportive of the tree trimming versus just annoyed by it. Right. So he took that role and changed it to working with people versus just cutting the tree. But little things like that can go a long way. And I think there's other opportunities big and bad that we can look for. I don't know what they are, but it was an intriguing thought and discussion from having him here. So glad he was here. So thanks for that, Charlie. And he also mentioned that story about some guy that goes out and kicks a generator to start it. I was thinking, is that Casey? But then later he said Casey's one of the smart ones. I figured he was in my mind, just picturing Casey.
December 23rd, 2023. Did either of you kick anything? It might have been too cold. It might have been too cold to kick anything that day. Yeah, you kicked your car last week.
And so on the opt-out topic, one thing I kind of liked about that, I didn't want to mention it beforehand, but I like that it was, you're basically saying, hey, make a decision we're committed to, even though the staff doesn't know how we're gonna get there, and trust that we'll figure it out. And if we can't figure it out, we'll figure out something else that'll get us, where we need to. So I like that that was very easy for the board to do, just say, yeah, we figure the staff will figure it out. When we're safe kind of committing to this decision without something concrete in place. Again, the crew has been out in front of my house from Grindle doing the poles, and I kind of mentioned this last time, but I like kind of watching them work, the whole fact that they're always moving, but they're never rushing. I just kind of like the pace. I mean, it seems like it's always, every time I see it work like that. People are always moving, never standing around, no one's racing or doing something done. It's just a great culture that you're perpetuating. So thanks for finishing that. And then I just, thinking of Jamie and Ryan. Yeah, it's just so fun. I think everybody hates cancer at this point, but that's just hard. I don't know. I don't know what else to say. I'll let Perry say something nice about it. He's good at that. Lastly, I just wanted to ask the picture slide about the hockey thing. I was kind of curious if Zach and Julie are hockey fans.
Zach is a huge fan. I can speak for Zach.
Yeah. That's kind of being
Julie's with Julie.
okay.
She grew up.
Party animal.
Like the part of the, I mean, it comes a lot. But I like the part that you got the players to high five folks. And,
That's
that's also a cool little example of leadership too, right? It's just a tiny little thing, but it's like, hey, it just makes everybody enjoy it that much more. So appreciate the initiative. And
Jim.
that's good for me.
Yeah, I was disappointed I missed the hockey game, but we did give away $111,000 that night to charity organizations throughout the greater Lowell area. So that was fun. So that didn't get done. So Perry, I want you to have a safe trip there and back when you leave, and hope you enjoy your grandkids for a little bit of time while you're out there.
I'm gonna give us all the gift of me not saying anything.
Good. Dana.
I have nothing either. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I'm looking forward. Again, it's kind of twofold. Stop and see my grandkids and my daughter and son-in-law in Denver, and then continuing on to California for the rodeo. And so looking forward to that. Again, it's been several years since we've partaked, and we're gonna get back into it and have a lot of fun and represent Lowell well. And I'm kind of like you, Andrew. I just wish the best for Jamie and Ryan and their family. And that's about all you can say. So with that, entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn at 9:58.
Oh,
Like the old days.
Supported.
those all in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Now I'll get home and my wife, you kept them there that.